Hello and welcome to Quiet Hours, a place where the world slows down and mysterious stories fill the silence of the night. Before we begin, make sure you're comfortable and ready to relax. And if you enjoy these relaxing horror stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Now, let the quiet take over and the story begin. It was around 11 p.m. on a summer night, and we decided to bring out the Ouija board for some cheap scares. We'd used it at our high school before, a spot that seemed to have more activity than anywhere else we'd tried. We set up at a bench near the quad and started with our usual questions. What's your name? How old are you? Are you male or female? The answers were mostly gibberish, except it gave us 7 for age and yes to being a girl. Then, without warning, it stopped responding. We waited for a minute, barely seeing any movement on the board. Then something strange happened. I found myself staring at one spot in the distance, unable to look away. Out of nowhere, I burst into tears. I'm a big guy, a football player, not someone who cries easily, but I couldn't stop. I didn't feel any sadness or emotion, just confusion as I gasped for air between sobs. My friends were watching with freaked out, puzzled faces, unsure of what to do. After about 5 minutes, I managed to calm down, and we quickly closed the board and decided to leave. But that was just the beginning. We got into the car, shaken and silent. I hadn't said a word since we left, still trying to process what had just happened. We'd left so fast that I suddenly blurted, "Check the board. Something's wrong with the board." My friend in the back seat opened it up, and everything inside was upside down. None of us could remember if we'd left it that way, but it felt wrong. We put it back in order and started driving. About 5 minutes down the road, my friend in the back seat began to cry, hysterically. He was screaming that she was angry, that we had done something wrong. He kept yelling and crying, rambling incoherently while we tried to figure out what to do. The friend driving suggested we head to his place, hoping to calm down. The friend in the back seat finally settled, and as we were pulling over so our driver could call his aunt to see if we could crash there, my friend in the back seat suddenly said, "Look over there." We were parked right next to a graveyard, and as soon as I looked over, both he and I started crying again, this time uncontrollably. We were yelling at our driver to leave, but he was still on the phone, totally unfazed. Finally, as we pulled away from the graveyard, we turned on the radio, hoping to ease the tension. The first song that played was "I Kissed a Girl and I Liked It." None of us had ever heard it before, and, thinking it was a guy singing, we all burst out laughing. The laughter felt strange, almost manic. Our friend driving later described it as sounding demonic, but somehow it broke the tension, and the oppressive feeling lifted. Over the following week, my friend and I, the ones who had cried, experienced intense panic attacks whenever we thought about that night. It was my first time dealing with panic attacks, and it felt like a lingering presence had attached itself to us. We couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was had followed us, though we both hoped it had stayed behind at the graveyard. But maybe it was all just in our heads. Even now, thinking back, I'm not sure if it was a spirit, a possession, or just our minds playing tricks. But I'll never forget that night, or the strange feeling that still lingers when I remember it. My first strange experience happened when I was 6 and continued every time I visited my grandmother's house. My mom and I moved in with her because my mom was very sick. My aunt and her youngest daughter were also living there, making it a very full house. To give you a sense of the layout, the house sat behind a small wood fence in the front yard, where the newspaper box marked the edge of the dirt road. A wooden front porch with 2 steps led up to the door, with rose bushes on each side. Entering the house, there was a built-in entry table, a mirror on top of cabinets with a small counter space. The dining room was off to the left and the formal living room and master bedroom to the right. The other 2 bedrooms and the bathroom were directly across from each other on the other side of the entry table. Off the dining room were the family room, kitchen, and laundry room. The laundry room and family room each had doors that originally led outside, but my grandma later added a large room for storage, which also became my playroom and my cousin's bedroom when she got older. Outside, there was a carport to the left with my grandma's veggie garden and fruit trees. My aunt's rock house, a clothesline, and a hammock were nearby, along with a shed holding an old camper trailer and boxes dating back to the 1920s. A tool shed sat next to the camper shed, which was close to the doughboy pool, a deck, and a jacuzzi. A fence separated my grandma's backyard from the entrance yard to her dance school. Next to that was a small costume shed. From the day we moved in, things felt off, though I didn't say anything. I was young, my mom was sick, and we were far from the home I knew. I was excited by the yard, though. It felt huge, and I couldn't wait to have pets of my own. But my first night was unsettling. The hallway felt impossibly long, as if I could run to my grandma's room but would never make it. I never liked that hallway, especially at night, and would always run down it as fast as I could. The yard was strangely quiet. Not in a peaceful way, but in a void, eerie way. If a car passed by on the dirt road, you could see it but wouldn't hear a sound. Only if you stood across the road could you hear the car's noise. My grandma wanted to teach me how to garden, so we planted veggies and trees together, but the trees never grew. They didn't die either, they just stayed in this strange state of limbo. The veggies, however, thrived, and we had a full harvest until it was time to pick the corn. I remember that day vividly. My grandma and I had baskets full of corn, and since it was hot, we decided to shuck them inside. I started shucking the first cob when, suddenly, ants spilled out all over me. I was highly allergic to ants, so I screamed, and my mom and grandma rushed to help, making sure I wasn't bitten. After I calmed down, I returned to the table, hesitant. My grandma assured me it wouldn't happen again, but as soon as I opened the next cob, more ants poured out. My grandma took over, but none of the other cobs did that to her. After that, everything in the garden died except for tomatoes near the house. This was the first strange event, triggering a cascade of eerie experiences. After that, I couldn't bring myself to look in any mirrors, especially the one in the entryway. It always felt like something was watching me from the other side. We had a cat who followed me everywhere, even waking up at 5 a.m. with me on Saturdays. I'd stand on a stool to reach the toaster, and she would sit under it, watching me. One morning, though, she ran toward the hall, her fur puffed up, as if there were an intruder. I watched as she leapt into the air, seemingly fighting something invisible. I heard a thud like the front door closing, and our blind dog started barking. The cat returned, mewed, and settled under the stool as if nothing had happened. But she went missing about a month later, somehow getting outside, which was odd because she never ventured near the dogs. Just before my mom and I moved out, I had my first encounter with a visible entity. When the shed attached to my grandma's dance studio was built, there was a small hole they could never keep filled. The dogs always avoided it except for our blind dog, who would sniff around it. I was playing fetch with our bull mastiff when I noticed a figure watching me from under that hole. It wasn't an animal. It resembled something out of a storybook, like Gollum. I threw the ball toward it, hoping my dog would investigate, but she ignored it and went to find a different ball. I looked away for a second, and when I looked back, it was gone. As I stepped off the porch to check, I felt an icy touch on my ankle, almost like a hand. My dog yanked me to the ground, pulling me back. After that, I always jumped the second step to avoid the spot. After that, there was an unsettling feeling every time I was there, though nothing physical happened again. But one thing did stay with me, a recurring dream that began at that house and still continues to this day. There's one reason I wanted to share my story. I don't doubt that the land has a history. When neighbors were laying pipes, they discovered a skeleton with poker chips in its mouth, buried not far from my grandmother's property. The area is right off Old Highway 395, which used to be the main route between Los Angeles and Vegas. When my mom was looking for a new home, her criteria were simple: 3 bedrooms, a nice neighborhood with good schools, and ideally a swimming pool. She narrowed it down to 3 houses, and we were all thrilled, especially my brother and me, at the idea of a home where I'd finally have my own room. One of these homes was a nice place in Lakewood, California, a quiet suburb near Long Beach, with neat lawns and good schools. It fit all our needs: 3 bedrooms, a pool, and even a rec room for entertaining. But from the first visit, I felt uneasy in the house. It seemed dark, closed off, and had a strange energy. The back bedroom, built onto the original 2-bedroom layout, was connected to the house through the bathroom, with its own door leading to the backyard and pool area. The garage had been converted into the rec room, which my mom loved, but I hated it. Every time I walked into that room, I felt like I was being watched, and it was always unnaturally cold. It didn't help that the room backed onto a dark, empty dirt lot, adding to the eerie vibe. The couple selling the house had a baby girl, and while we visited several times, I never saw the little boy whose room would soon be my brother's. His room was fully decorated, but he was never there, which I found strange. My mom bought the house and we moved in during the summer of 1986. Soon after, she introduced us to her boyfriend, who quickly moved in, and within months they were married. Life should have felt like an all-American dream, complete with a new dog and fish, but strange things began happening almost immediately. One day, while painting the rec room, I suddenly felt like I was being suffocated. It was as if the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I ran outside, and only then could I breathe normally. When I told my mom, she shrugged it off as paint fumes, but I knew it wasn't. Meanwhile, my mom and stepdad's relationship deteriorated, with arguments that grew increasingly violent. Yelling, broken dishes, and slammed doors became the new normal. My brother and I hid in our rooms, waiting for the chaos to end. I often curled up in my room, crying, as life at home became unbearable. I began seeing shadowy figures moving around the house, especially in my room, and I developed a fear of being home alone. I shared these experiences with my mom, who dismissed them as childhood paranoia. I asked if anyone had ever died in the house, but she reassured me that the realtor would have disclosed that. Yet, the absence of the little boy whose room was now my brother's remained unexplained. One afternoon, I went swimming alone while my grandmother was visiting. As I floated in the deep end, I suddenly felt a hand on my left shoulder, gently but firmly pushing me down. I felt each finger press into my skin. Terrified, I scrambled to the edge of the pool, pulled myself out, and ran inside, crying. My grandmother consoled me and advised me not to swim alone again. After that, I refused to get back into the pool, even when my parents hosted pool parties. As time went on, the atmosphere in the house worsened. Shadows seemed darker, rooms colder, and my nightmares more frequent. I began hearing a deep male voice, often whispering in my ear. One morning, while showering before school, with my mom in the bathroom blow-drying her hair, the voice spoke directly in my ear, saying, "Earthquake!" Startled, I shut off the water and jumped out of the shower. My mom looked at me like I was crazy. Someone just said, "Earthquake." I insisted. She dismissed me, but moments later, the house began to shake. It was the 7.1 Whittier earthquake. When the shaking stopped, my mom stood in stunned silence. As the year passed, my stepdad's drinking became a problem, and he seemed increasingly depressed. Family gatherings dwindled, and eventually the pool parties stopped. One night, my godfather visited, but he and my stepdad got into a fight that turned physical, with my godfather breaking my stepdad's leg with a small push broom. That was the last time I ever saw my godfather, and the household grew more miserable. Our dog, a purebred Cocker Spaniel, had puppies, 3 boys and 1 girl. Friends and family quickly reserved the puppies, with the little girl promised to my mom's best friend, Jody, who was also planning to buy our house as we prepared to move to Moreno Valley. Late one night, our dog began barking uncontrollably. I went to the back door and tried to quiet him, but he kept barking and looking over his shoulder at the pool, as if trying to tell me something. When I went to investigate, I saw the girl puppy lying motionless on the pool step ledge, submerged in the water. Devastated, I told my mom, and she broke the news to Jody that she wouldn't be getting the puppy after all. Before we moved, I confided in my mom, telling her that something was wrong with the house. She admitted that she felt it too and was looking forward to leaving. But even after we moved, I still felt as though something had followed us. Jody moved into the house, and 3 years later, on June 26, 1992, she didn't show up for work. My mom's other best friend, Yolanda, worked with her and, concerned, asked Jody's mother to check on her. Jody's mom found her body at the bottom of the pool. Jody, a strong swimmer, a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and a vibrant person, was discovered in her nightgown, with no signs of struggle. The lights were still on inside, clothes were in the washer and dryer, and half-folded laundry lay on the kitchen table. The coroner found no injuries, heart attack, or aneurysm. Her death was ruled a drowning, but the circumstances were baffling. Why would she be outside in her nightgown at night, alone by the pool? Her family quickly put the house on the market, and despite dropping the price by over $30,000, it sat unsold in a prime neighborhood with a pool. Years later, I found the house on Google Maps and noticed something strange. Unlike the other houses nearby, the address on the curb was blurred out. When I zoomed in, I saw a man with his back turned, seemingly watering his driveway. I've wondered if the current owners have had similar experiences, but even if I had the chance, I'd never set foot in that place again. I had a wonderful childhood and a large, loving family. There were 8 of us. My parents, my 3 sisters, my aunt, my uncle, and me. All crammed into a small 3-bedroom duplex in Milpitas, just north of San Jose. It was our first home after immigrating from the Philippines in 1985, filled with life, love, and laughter. Despite the joy, though, the house always had an oppressive, uneasy feeling. Shadows would sometimes flit about just beyond our line of sight. Plants would sway as if they had a life of their own despite no breeze. You know, the typical signs of a haunted house. We were a spiritual but practical family, and most of the time we brushed off these incidents as odd but natural occurrences. But one night, when I was 16, something happened that I couldn't explain away. By that time, we'd lived in the house for about 9 years, and while the strange happenings were infrequent, maybe once a week or so, the oppressive feeling seemed to be getting worse, especially in the garage and hallway that led directly to it. It was like a straight line of dread. One weekend, I had a sleepover with a few friends, Mai, Jay, and Ivy. Mai had brought over a Ouija board that her mom had bought from Toys R Us. At the time, we didn't take Ouija boards seriously. They were just another toy. Now, I know better, but back then, we were just kids looking for some fun. It was late at night, and with my family all asleep, we gathered in the living room, leaving the TV on mute so there'd be a bit of background light. We started the session with the usual questions, asking if anyone was there and trying to interpret the answers. I honestly can't remember most of what was asked or answered because I wasn't paying close attention. After a while, I got bored and, thinking one of my friends was moving the planchette, muttered, "Boring! This is a waste of time." Then, like a jerk, I flipped the board over, abruptly ending the session. Not even a minute later, the TV suddenly turned off and emitted an ear-splitting, piercing screech. Startled, I scrambled for the remote to turn it off, but it wasn't responding. I tried the power button on the TV, but nothing happened. Desperate, I squeezed behind the entertainment center to unplug it, but even unplugged, the TV kept screeching. Terrified, we bolted out the front door and huddled together in the front yard, staring at the living room window as the noise continued to blare. The sound went on for what felt like an eternity before it finally stopped. We cautiously went back inside, half expecting to find something sinister waiting for us. Instead, we were met by a strange, oppressive heat in the air, unusual for a chilly fall night. I warily approached the TV, which felt like some sort of monster in disguise, plugged it back in, and pressed the power button. Came on without a problem, as if nothing had happened. We were speechless, each of us trying to make sense of what we'd just witnessed. Later on, Mai and I talked about that night and realized something even stranger. None of the other 7 members of my family had heard a thing. The walls in that duplex were paper thin. You could hear someone shifting in bed from the living room. Yet not a single person came out to check on the noise or ask what was happening. That night left us with more questions than answers, and it's something I still think about whenever I remember that little house in Milpitas. I just turned 40, and the past few years have been incredibly difficult for my family and me. I'm married with 2 young children, both of whom I believe have an intuitive sensitivity to the paranormal, though in a way I think all children do. I can't shake this sense of a black cloud hanging over us, especially in recent years. In brief, my parents have faced serious health challenges: brain tumor, colon cancer, And last year, I lost my best friend to cancer after a long fight. She was like my soul sister, and losing her has left me feeling lost, struggling to breathe without her. I was by her side almost every day in her last months, even sitting beside her as she passed. Since then, I've felt adrift. Beyond that, I've endured 3 miscarriages. We lost our home due to the economy, and both my husband and I lost our jobs, leading us to bankruptcy. Now, while we're both employed again, our marriage is under strain from all the stress. We recently moved into my parents' home to get back on our feet financially. Despite my gratitude for my parents' support, there's an unsettling feeling in the house that seems to be compounding everything. At night, I hear voices, murmurs, and sometimes chanting. When I lived here years ago before getting married, I had numerous small paranormal experiences. Once, I saw a smoky black cloud hovering above my bed, and it felt ominous. I also used to feel someone sit at the end of my bed each morning, as though watching over me. I could even hear it breathing, and there was an indentation on the bed where it Saturday oddly. This presence felt comforting. One night, while staying at my fiancé's house, my parents heard someone enter, set down what sounded like luggage, open the fridge, and then nothing. They thought it was my younger brother, only to learn he hadn't come home that night. There was also an evening when, while driving, I sensed shadow people all around me. I called out, asking if anyone was there, and immediately, the electricity on the entire street went out with a bright spark at the far end. Terrified me. I thanked them and asked them to bring the electricity back, and within moments, the lights returned. I went inside and prayed, trying to make sense of it all. I can't shake the feeling that either this house or my family is attracting something negative. Every day seems to bring some new kind of drama, never anything good. I'm plagued by nightmares of losing my children, disturbing visions of disembodied parts, and even apocalyptic scenarios. For background, I grew up having positive paranormal experiences. I would hear voices, have glimpses of the future, and dream of deceased loved ones who visited me, especially my grandmother, who filled me with a sense of deep, unconditional love. My husband, however, is uncomfortable with these things, so we rarely talk about them. Yet, even he has started having nightmares and night sweats. I had him get a full physical, but he's perfectly healthy. Since all these life changes, especially the loss of my friend, I felt my faith slip away. I haven't sensed her presence since she passed, which frustrates me and deepens my disappointment in myself. I just want one moment of connection with her, a chance to feel her near me again. What should I do? I feel strongly that my parents' house needs cleansing. Over the years, it has been the backdrop for all kinds of misfortunes, from small mishaps to life-altering challenges. Things constantly go wrong here. Everything from flat tires and broken appliances to mysteriously disappearing clothes and shoes. Sometimes there are strange odors like mold or gas, but we've had professionals check and nothing's wrong. We're all tired, constantly sick, and plagued with headaches, joint pain, and endless colds. This sense of constant fear and unease hangs over everyone in the house. My parents, my husband, my kids, and me. I know life is full of challenges, but when it's this unrelenting, and people around us start to notice, it feels like something more. I don't even want to talk about it with others because the answer is always the same, something bad. To give you a sense of the atmosphere, my mom has pneumonia, my daughter has had a cough for 3 months, and she's only 20 months old. My son is also unwell, and my dad has fallen into a depression since his cancer treatment. Even our doctor is puzzled. There's something wrong in this house, and I need help. I've always been open to positive energy and good people, and I used to work with a talented energy healer who made a meaningful difference in my life. I trust my intuition and know I need to bring light back into this house. I feel the need to drive out whatever negativity has taken hold. My cousin was a very important person in my life, so when she passed away, my family and I mourned her deeply. We were still grieving her loss when we received more heartbreaking news. My grandma had also passed. This was the first time I had lost anyone close to me, and I found myself navigating the difficult stages of grief. Not long after, I was staying in my younger brother's room, sleeping in his bed for a change of scenery. My loyal 3-year-old dog, who rarely left my side, was curled up on the floor next to the bed. I'd left the lights halfway on, something I usually did when I felt nervous or uneasy. The bedroom door was to my left, and the window facing our front yard was directly in front of me. Outside the window stood a large apple tree that my dad cared for with great affection. Around 1 a.m., I awoke suddenly, as if something had roused me, but the room was silent. My dog, too, woke up, looking around, though strangely he didn't growl or bark. This surprised me because he was a naturally nervous dog who would often react to the smallest disturbance. Then, as I lay there, I heard the soft thud of an apple falling from the tree. I'm not sure why, but I remember that small detail clearly. As I continued lying on my back, I saw a figure of light enter the room. A bright yellow outline of a human form, transparent but unmistakably there. It walked through the open doorway and approached me, radiating a warmth that held me in place, paralyzed by a mix of fear and awe. The figure gently whispered my name in my language, calling me, "My Nicole." It came closer, and as it reached out, I shut my eyes, overwhelmed by a powerful wave of love. My fear melted away as I felt an immense warmth and reassurance. I wanted to know who it was, and as I asked silently, I felt sensations and impressions wash over me. Love, mother, woman, power, an overwhelming feeling of unconditional love. It was almost too much for me to bear. I felt a pulsing warmth in my stomach, and then a surge of energy radiated from the palms of my hands, the top of my head, and the soles of my feet. It repeated, over and over, filling me with a warmth and peace unlike anything I'd ever experienced. In my heart, I felt a motherly presence, and for a moment, I thought it might be my mom. But then I remembered my mom was asleep down the hall. I called out, wondering if it was my cousin who had just passed, or perhaps even my grandma. Then, just as gently as it had come, the presence left me. I rolled to my side, whispering a prayer and asking God to never let it happen again. It had shaken me so profoundly. The next morning, over breakfast, I told my mom what had happened. She listened, then shared something that took me by surprise. My grandma used to call me "My Nicole" when she visited years ago, and on her deathbed, she had expressed a deep wish to see both my dad and me one last time. I knew then that my grandma must have visited him too, down the hall that night. This experience has become an anchor in my life. Whenever I doubt my faith, question the afterlife, or struggle with my sense of belonging, I remember that night and the overwhelming feeling of love and connection that filled me. It has brought me strength and peace, even in the darkest moments. It was 2009 in La Mesa Village, Monterey, California. I just returned home from my college classes around 3 p.m. My mom was down the street picking up my 2 younger sisters from school, and my dad wouldn't be home from work for another couple of hours. After parking, I used my spare key to unlock the front door, then stepped onto the tile floor and headed down the carpeted hallway. The tile divided the living room to my right from the computer room to my left. Where the tile ended, the carpeted hallway began, just wide enough for our coat closet and shoe rack. Directly in front of me was a perpendicular hallway with my room immediately to the right and the other rooms branching off to the left. I dropped my backpack on my bed, emptied my pockets of my wallet, notepad, and odds and ends, then walked back toward the front door to hang my keys on the wall. As I crossed from the carpet back onto the tile, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A pile of clothes on the couch in the living room. Let me paint a picture. Standing on the tile with the front door to my right, you could look through the living room toward the front of the house. Our TV sat centered between 2 tall windows, with a couch on either side. My parents would place laundry baskets in the middle of the room, folding clothes on one couch while sorting them by person on the other. I assumed my mom had started a load of laundry before heading out to pick up my sisters. I registered all this from my peripheral vision without giving it much thought, until the pile of clothes moved. I glanced over and saw a girl around 14 with brown hair, sitting on the left side of the couch. She was leaning forward, her arms resting on her knees. She must have noticed me too, because as I stepped from the carpet to the tile, she looked up and our eyes met. We saw each other clear as day. She wore a black long-sleeve, V-neck shirt with silver floral designs around the neck and chest. But as quickly as I saw her, she vanished. Not abruptly, but with a strange, gentle fade. I was spooked but didn't feel threatened. If anything, her expression seemed lonely, almost lost. Months later, I was doing dishes. My family was home, watching a Netflix DVD in the living room while I tidied up after dinner. The kitchen light above the sink and the center light in the room were on, but the dining room light across from me was off. To my right, the hallway light illuminated a familiar path. Now, this might sound strange, but I've always been able to feel shifts in the air density when someone or something enters a room. But this time, I didn't sense anything. As I washed dishes from left to right, soapy water, rinse, dishwasher, I noticed a shadow fall near the corner of the counter to my left, where it met the microwave shelf. Thinking it was someone placing dessert dishes next to the sink, I turned to see who it was. But instead of someone standing back, I found myself face to face with a shadow. So close, I jumped. I glanced quickly to make sure I wasn't about to trip over the open dishwasher door. But when I looked back, no one was there. I chuckled nervously, chalking it up to my imagination, and began to walk away. But as I took my first few steps, a chill ran through me, tingling like a draft. Yet, when I walked back to the sink, the room felt warm again, as if nothing unusual had happened. I had told my mom about the girl I'd seen before on the couch, so I felt compelled to tell her about this too. "Mom," I called as I walked to the doorway of the computer room. "What?" she replied from the living room. "It happened again. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more." It's almost midnight, and I'm relaxing on the couch, watching an episode of Friends. When the credits roll, I check my phone. It's 11:57. I get up, wander to my front porch, and take a moment to look up at the moon. But as I step outside, a strange, uneasy feeling washes over me, like I'm being watched. I can't quite place it, so I scan the block. I live on a dead-end street, and my house sits right in the middle. All seems quiet, until I notice something on the sidewalk across the street. At first, it looks like a woman dressed in black, but the more I stare, the stranger it becomes. I stand frozen on my porch, staring at her, or at whatever it is, for about 10 to 15 seconds, pinching myself to make sure I'm awake. Suddenly, a rush of fear shoots through me, so I open my metal screen door and step back inside, but I keep watching through the door. The figure seems to be a woman, maybe about 5 feet 2 inches, slightly pudgy. She's wearing a black skirt that reaches just below her knees, a black sweater, black, flat shoes that look like they belong to someone much older, and a veil that covers her head, concealing any hair or neck. She stands perfectly still, and the longer I watch, the more unsettling it becomes. Most people shift their weight even when they're standing still, but this figure is straight as a board, unnaturally still. The only light outside comes from streetlights, and the house she's standing in front of is dark, save for the soft blue glow of a TV in the front window. It's late, so the street is empty, no cars, no pedestrians. It's like everything else has faded away, leaving just me and this figure in a surreal silence, broken only by the distant hum of the freeway. I don't feel any wind or hear any sounds. It feels like time has stopped. As I watch her, I realize I can't tell if she's facing me or turned away. I can't make out her face under the veil, but the sensation of being watched is overwhelming. I focus on her legs and shoes, trying to figure out which way she's facing, but it's impossible to tell. My instinct is to call for my brother, but then a chilling thought crosses my mind. What if it hears me and shows me something I don't want to see? My fear mounts, and I run to my brother's room, about 15 feet from the front door, and tell him to come quickly. Within 10 seconds, we're both back at the door, but the figure is gone. The street is just as empty as before, no signs of anyone or anything around. We step outside, looking around, but there's no one there. It's as if she simply vanished into thin air. A few days later, I mentioned the experience to my neighbor, the owner of the house where she had been standing. He told me that someone had been leaving strange items around his property. bags filled with meat and hair. One day, while walking from the computer room toward the living room, then around the corner into the hall leading to my room, I passed through an unusually chilly spot in the air. It was enough to make my hair stand on end, which was odd since the house was comfortably warm, around 75 to 80 degrees. I looked up, searching for a vent but didn't see one, so I walked back through the spot, but the chill was gone. With everything I'd seen and heard in the house over the years, I chalked it up to one of those unexplainable cold spots and brushed it off. By March, I was sitting with my mom in the living room when she told me about something strange that had happened the night before. My mom was sitting on the couch by the front door, while I sat across from her. As we talked, I felt an odd sensation, like the room was shifting or shrinking. I'd felt this before, almost as if the air around me thickened, and it made me feel as if someone else was there. For example, once while walking through a cemetery in Monterey around 6 p.m. with my girlfriend, I felt a similar shift in the air. I stopped abruptly. "Hold on," I said. "What's wrong?" she asked. "There's something around that corner, about my height, maybe a bit taller." Cautiously, we peeked around the corner and found a deer. It glanced at us, then ran away. This sensation of density, whether in regular places or paranormal moments, had become familiar to me. Back in the living room, I would sometimes feel like someone entered the room or stood directly behind me while I watched TV. Occasionally, I'd even feel the presence stop in front of me, lingering for a moment before fading away. It was as though I could almost see it as a shape in the air. As my mom continued her story, she explained that while I was gone the previous night, she and my dad were watching TV in the living room. My dad was lying on the same couch I now sat on, and their cocker spaniel, Candy, was lying on his chest, sound asleep. Suddenly, Candy jumped up, hopped off the couch, and stared into the distance down the hall, through the computer room toward the kitchen, growling and barking at the air. She wouldn't calm down, even when my dad tried to command her. This was unusual, as she always obeyed him on the first command. Finally, she quieted, but she'd been barking in the same direction. I often felt the shift in the air. As my mom recounted the story, I felt the same shift move through the room. I didn't react outwardly, but I sensed it. My mom froze mid-sentence, her gaze shifting to the corner where the computer room met the hall. "What did you see?" I asked. She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I don't know. It was like a shadow walking around the corner." I walked over to where she'd pointed, noting that the only light in the room came from the ceiling fan with 4 bulbs. I asked her, "Was it a free-floating shadow or was it on the wall?" "It was on the wall," she replied, "but it was lighter than one shadow and darker than the other." Intrigued, I asked if she could tell which direction the shadow was moving. She said it looked like it came from the computer room and disappeared down the hall. When I tried to mimic the motion, she said the shadow she saw must have been at the perfect angle, since even my movements didn't quite match it. A month later, in April, I was recording a song in my room. The mic was set up near my closet and directly under one of the attic entrances, a typical setup for creepy encounters. When I listened to the recording, I heard something strange. There was a soft, sighing voice that distorted the mic slightly, though I hadn't heard it while recording. I adjusted the settings, but the waveform matched my own voice. Puzzled but intrigued, I decided to leave it in the track. The sigh fit the eerie tone of my lyrics. Later that month, I was walking from the utility room back to my bedroom and saw the back half of Candy standing inside my door. As I walked closer, I heard her growling softly at the empty wall, and when I looked, I saw nothing. She then looked up at me and wandered off, her usual curiosity seemingly satisfied. One night, I lay in bed with Candy beside me, waiting for her to fall asleep before turning off the light. Suddenly, she jerked awake and stared intensely at the top left corner of my window, unmoving. I followed her gaze but saw nothing. Curious, I glanced at the clock. It was around 11 p.m. For the next 15 minutes, she didn't look away, even when I nudged her or called her name, which was unusual for a dog so easily distracted. And then there was the ghost hunter spoof video I made with my sisters. Using my mom's night vision camera, we filmed in my parents' room with the blinds closed. It was supposed to be a funny, impromptu video, but when I reviewed the footage, I noticed an unexpected EVP. Amid the jokes, a faint voice muttered, "It appears," just before I interrupted it mid-sentence. The voice was barely audible, but it was distinctly there. No one else had been speaking at that moment, and it was captured on both the tape recorder and the video. One night, around 1 a.m., my mom, sister, and her friend were in the living room while I searched the computer room for the source of a strange plastic sound. I'd left a tape recorder on the coffee table, and later, I discovered the same EVP had been recorded, with the same strange, low voice. It wasn't my family, and it didn't match any of our voices. After that, I began to take these paranormal encounters a bit more seriously. There are 2 rooms in the house I absolutely hate going into. One is what we call the back room, and the other is Richard's party room. The woman I care for and her husband, Richard, built the house in the early 1960s, and they've lived there ever since. They were, and still are, quite wealthy, and the house is massive. It even has an elevator, although no one ever uses it. The layout feels like a maze, with one room leading into the next, and another beyond that. The back room is located past her bedroom, behind a door that looks like a closet. But open it and it leads to the washer and dryer, and beyond that, there's another door that leads into what looks like a bedroom, though it's mostly used for storage now. Boxes, clothes, an old safe, and a folded-up hospital bed from when Richard was ill are all kept in there. That room is always freezing cold, even if the rest of the house is at a comfortable 68 to 70 degrees. We've tried everything to warm it up, opening the blinds, turning up the heater, even letting the door stay open, but it stays icy cold, like it's trapped in winter. The other room I avoid is Richard's party room. When they built the house, Richard designed a large room specifically for hosting get-togethers with their many friends. It has a full bar, couches, tables, a fire stove, a large fish tank, and even its own bathroom. I was told it was his favorite room, and he spent countless hours there. After Richard passed, the woman I care for left everything exactly as it was. His coat still hangs by the front door, his shoes remain where he last left them, and all his clothes still hang in the closet. I'm not entirely sure, but I feel like his lingering presence might be connected to all the activity in the house. Richard became ill in 2007 and passed away a year later. Sometimes, the woman I care for will sleep for days straight due to her illness, which leaves me with little to do other than clean. Her house is so large that we use baby monitors to hear her from her bedroom. During my first week on the job, I turned up the monitor volume and lay down on the couch, dozing off. I rarely dream, but every time I fall asleep in her house, I have strange dreams. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by the sound of a man's voice coming from Richard's party room. Curious, I got up and walked over to the door, but just as I reached for the handle, the talking stopped. I opened the door, finding the room empty, but a chill ran down my spine as I quickly shut the door. Later that evening, another caregiver arrived to cover the night shift. As I was leaving, I casually mentioned hearing a man's voice in Richard's party room. She replied calmly, "Oh, that was probably just Richard." I stared at her, confused, and asked, "Has anyone else heard his voice?" She nodded. "Oh yeah, all over the house. Have you seen him yet?" When I said no, she explained that I was the only one in the house who hadn't seen him. She shared stories of how another caregiver once saw him standing by a window, mistaking him for the gardener until he vanished. Another saw him on the couch in the party room, only for him to disappear. Since starting work there, I haven't seen him, but strange things happen more frequently now. One night, I dozed off watching TV, and when I woke up, I went to the kitchen to get a drink. All the cabinets were open. The woman I care for was sound asleep in bed, and she never goes into the kitchen. Another time, while cleaning, I heard a man's voice calling my name from Richard's party room. The chills were indescribable. Then there was the night the lights started turning on and off all over the house. The hallway light would come on. I'd go turn it off, only for the bedroom lights to switch on. Then the bathroom lights would start up. This went on for about 45 minutes until, out of frustration, I finally yelled, "Would you just leave the lights alone?" And just like that, it stopped. Sometimes I find things moved, pictures fall from the walls, and occasionally there's loud banging from other rooms. Once, a bang was so loud I grabbed a knife and checked every room, certain someone had broken in. But the house was empty. The most recent incident happened while I was watching TV. I thought I heard the woman talking through the baby monitor, so I muted the TV, but it wasn't her. A man's voice came through the monitor, mumbling and making strange sounds, like he was trying to clear his throat or whisper. I couldn't make out any words, but I knew it wasn't her voice. When I went to check, she was sound asleep. Recently, I spoke with another caregiver who told me that Richard had passed away in the back room, the same room that always feels so cold. She told me she'd seen him the day after he died. While everyone said he had a peaceful death, she didn't believe it. She described finding him with his chest lifted, chin up, mouth open as if he'd been screaming, with a look of pain on his face. She said she never knew someone could look like that when they died. Now I'm left wondering what to do. Should I pray over the house and ask him to leave, or let him stay? A coworker told me to leave him be, as he just wants to be close to his wife. But the woman I care for doesn't know any of this. She believes he's moved on. If I were to ask him to leave, she'd never know. What would you do? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. About a month ago, I woke up in the middle of the night and couldn't fall back asleep. To pass the time, I switched on my small clock radio on the bedside table, listening to some late-night radio to relax and hopefully drift off again. As I lay there, my gaze drifted toward the master bathroom when I noticed a strange light. It was a soft, white glow, about the brightness of a flashlight, but it didn't look like one. It lasted only about a second, and unlike a directional flashlight beam, this light seemed to fill the room with a soft, even glow. At first, I brushed it off as one of the many devices charging in the bathroom, my electric razor, toothbrush, or the nightlight. But none of them could have created that light. The toothbrush's charge indicator is a dim green, the nightlight casts an orange glow, and the shaver's light is a faint blue. None of these lights were bright enough to illuminate the room as this one did. I even considered that it might have been an outdoor light from a neighbor's house. But I've lived here for nearly 8 years and had never seen anything like this before. Plus, there was no sign of any light in the bedroom itself. It was as if the glow was contained solely within the bathroom. To help clarify, our bedroom layout places the master bath on the south side, directly opposite a walk-in closet. From the bed, I can't see into either room directly since they're both at right angles to the bed. So all I could see was the soft glow emanating from the bathroom. Over the next few weeks, I noticed the light a couple more times, usually between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m., always in the dead of night when it's easiest to notice. When I told my wife, she brushed it off, assuming I was either kidding or imagining things. But a few days ago, she finally saw it too. Around 4 a.m., she caught the same brief, white glow that I had seen, lasting only a second before it disappeared. She was surprised, and it left both of us a bit bewildered. Then, this morning, something happened that made me think there was more to this light than just a quirky device. The night before, I'd unplugged the shaver, the only device with a bluish-white light. This time, I didn't see the glow during the night, but something unusual happened as I got up to shower around 6:20 a.m. While in the shower, I suddenly noticed a soft, white light shining from the bedroom, around the corner from the bathroom entrance. Remember, the bedroom is at a right angle to the bathroom, so it shouldn't be visible from there. But for 1 or 2 seconds, there was the same familiar glow, then nothing. I quickly stepped out and asked my wife if she'd turned on a light, but she was still fast asleep and hadn't seen or done anything. This wasn't the first time we'd experienced something strange in the house. A few years ago, after my grandmother passed away, we noticed an occasional floral, perfume-like scent that would appear in random rooms. Strangely, the scent often appeared when we were going through tough times, but it hadn't happened in quite a while. The light doesn't feel threatening. It's more of a curiosity. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? It's not an orb or a streak, just an odd momentary glow in the next room. It's strange, and I'm left wondering what it could be. For reference, my eyesight is perfectly fine, and I'm not imagining it. My wife saw it too. Most of these occurrences happen at work. I haven't been able to uncover much about the building's history or what stood here before my company, and since it's private property, I can't really ask others to help me dig into it without risking trouble. But here's what I've experienced. 1. At the end of the day, I was walking from my desk to the front office. As I passed the receiving dock, pallets of products lined up beside the conveyor, which was turned off. The warehouse was silent, with most of the staff gone. As I approached one of the taller pallets, I saw a dark figure move out from behind it, as if it had been caught off guard. Thinking it was a coworker, I walked around to say goodbye. But when I reached the other side, there was no one there, and I hadn't heard a sound. 2. Another time I took a break to use the ladies' room. There are 3 stalls, 2 small ones and a larger one for handicap access. I like a bit of space, so I usually use the larger stall. As I sat down, I heard the toilet in the farthest stall drain a little, as if someone had pressed the handle halfway, but no one else was in the bathroom. A moment later, it flushed fully. I quickly finished, did the "oh crap" shuffle to the sink, washed my hands, and hurried out. 3. While sitting at my desk, I often feel a faint, cold touch on my hand or arm. Warehouses can be drafty, but this feels different. A light tap, as if cold fingers were brushing against me. 4. Occasionally, my boss asks me to come in earlier than my usual 6 a.m. start, which means leaving while it's still dark. There's a long, unlit stretch of road on the way to the freeway where animals sometimes wander. I was running late one day and going faster than usual when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a large, fluffy white dog with a curled tail, like a Chinook or Malamute, trotting alongside the road. I immediately slowed down, but when I turned to get a better look, the dog had vanished. I felt like it was reminding me to watch my speed. 5. That same road is also part of my route home. One night, as I was driving back, windows down, music blaring, I was speeding a little. This time, I saw not a dog, but a person walking on the opposite side of the road. They wore dark jeans and a gray hoodie, hands in their pockets. I only caught a glimpse of them in my headlights, but just as I looked, they tilted their heads slightly to look back at me, then vanished. My radio briefly dissolved into static before returning to normal. I haven't seen any reports of someone getting hit on that road, and the area is mostly fields and farms. For some reason, I didn't mention this encounter to anyone until now. 6. My last 2 experiences happened at home. Shortly after my mom's wrist surgery, we were downstairs chatting while I made a sandwich. We were the only ones home, but suddenly we heard the floorboards above us creak, as if someone was walking across them. My parents' bedroom is above the kitchen, and the floor is very noisy when stepped on. My mom shrugged. "Must be the cats." I raised an eyebrow and pointed to the couch, where one cat lounged, and the other slept in the living room. She blinked, brushed it off, and continued talking. But then we heard it again. 5 slow, distinct footsteps moving across the floor. I grinned and said, "Our house is haunted, Mom." She gave me a look but didn't reply. 7. The last experience was in my bedroom. Sometimes, I feel an intense, inexplicable sense of dread there. I haven't been able to pinpoint why, but it lingers in the air. The house is just over 10 years old, and before it was built, the area was all dairy farms and desert. The house sat empty for 2 years before we moved in, and it had signs of being a hangout spot. Cigarette burns in the carpet, graffiti inside the cabinets, and BB holes in the windows. Once, while sitting at my computer playing a game, I felt the urge to look up. Just outside my bedroom doorway, a shadowy figure peeked around the corner, but as soon as I looked, it ducked out of sight. I assumed it was my brother, who likes to sneak up and scare us, but when I went to check, there was no one there. I've also had odd electrical interference in my room. Static and channel changes on the TV, dropped phone calls, rapidly draining phone batteries, and random internet disconnections, even after replacing the router. No one else in the house has issues with the internet, even when I'm the only one using it. Sometimes, I leave my sleep playlist on iTunes, but I'll wake to find the program mysteriously closed, or the surround sound completely shut off. I first saw her when I was 8 years old, on a chilly September night. I was getting ready for bed and brushing my teeth in the bathroom with the door half open, as mirrors always unnerved me. While brushing, I heard my parents singing, terribly, I might add, from their room. I chuckled at their lack of musical talent until a chill ran down my spine. I could feel someone's eyes on me, a heavy, negative energy filling the air. Slowly, I turned my head to the left, and there, in the bathroom doorway, stood a pale woman just inches away from me. At first glance, I thought it was my mother. She had the same dark, wavy hair, pale skin, and thin lips. I managed a small smile, but as I took a closer look, I realized this wasn't my mom. This woman was taller, much thinner, and her eyes were enormous and pitch black, not light brown like my mother's. She just stared, her eyes cold and unfriendly. Panic rose within me, but I couldn't move or even blink. I noticed her dress. It was white lace, reminiscent of the Victorian era. Her hair was tangled, half pulled back in a loose ponytail. When I looked back up at her face, she revealed a tiny set of pearly white teeth in a wicked, unforgiving smile that sent a wave of terror through me. Without a word, she turned and glided down the hall. I put down my toothbrush and, against my better judgment, followed her. I could still hear my parents' voices, but they felt distant, like they were miles away. I trailed the woman to the kitchen, where she made a sharp turn into the living room. "Who are you?" I called after her, but as I stepped into the living room, she was gone. I searched the house, top to bottom, but found nothing. Confused and shaken, I went back to bed, though sleep didn't come easily. About a week later, I was woken by my father's cell phone ringing in the living room. Glancing at the clock, I saw it was 3:26 a.m. I tried to ignore it, but the phone kept ringing for nearly 10 minutes. Frustrated, I finally got up, walked to the living room, and picked up the phone. When I answered, a strange, eerie chant came through the line. I quickly hung up, thinking it was some kind of prank. But as I stood there, I felt a presence. I looked up, and there she was again, sitting on the sofa, her black eyes fixed on me. Shocked, I froze, unable to move as she rose from her seat, that same malevolent smile spreading across her face. She took a step toward me, and though I tried to scream, no sound came out. It was as if I were glued to the ground. Summoning all my strength, I finally broke free and bolted back to my room, clutching my dad's cell phone. Once inside, I prayed fervently. When I finished, I glanced down at the phone screen to see if there was a call log, and to my horror, the caller ID simply read 666. I threw the phone across the room, shut my eyes, and tried to sleep, though I barely slept a wink that night. 4 years later, when I was 12, she returned. I was lying in bed, scrolling through songs on my iPod, looking for one to fall asleep to. As I set it down, I looked up, and there she was, her white face with deep black eyes hovering above me. She looked angrier this time. Before I could react, she grabbed my wrists, pressing one hand hard against my chest. I tried to fight, but I felt weak, helpless. "What do you want from me?" I managed to ask. She didn't answer at first, just began chanting a haunting melody, much like what I'd heard on the phone years before. I asked for her name, and in a low, rasping voice, she whispered, "Amanda." Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished into thin air. My wrists and chest throbbed painfully, and I broke down in quiet tears. Covering myself with my blanket, I tried to sleep, though the following morning was no easier. My wrists were red and sore, and a large bruise marked my chest. I was left in shock, unsure of what to believe. Thankfully, I haven't seen Amanda since that night. The last time I encountered anything unusual was a few months ago. A strange, early morning phone call at 5 a.m. But I still can't shake the memory of her eyes, that malevolent smile, and the feeling that somehow, she's not quite gone. This all started about a year ago and has been an experience I still can't fully explain. I've always been able to see spirits and ghosts around my school. They seemed drawn to the area, and after doing some research, I discovered that the land had a few murders dating back to the gold rush era. Usually, I can block them out, and although some encounters freak me out, I've learned to ignore them. It doesn't really bother me. I have a few friends who are spiritually sensitive, especially my friend Stargirl. She's kind and Christian, and though I'm pagan, she's never tried to push her beliefs on me. While she doesn't see spirits as often as I do, she sometimes senses them. We're open about our experiences, and one day at school, she mentioned seeing a strange figure that didn't match the usual spirits around campus. I promised to keep an eye out and went to PE. To give some context, my school layout is a bit unique. There are a few makeshift classrooms on the far left, near an abandoned elementary school. Behind the main building is a large blacktop with benches and basketball courts, and on the far right are more makeshift classrooms. During PE, my teacher asked me to deliver a note to a teacher in one of the classrooms on the far right. I groaned at the long walk, but I headed over. As I passed a small baseball diamond, I noticed a man sitting on one of the benches. He looked young, maybe in his early 20s, which was unusual since most of the teachers at my school are a bit older. Right away, I sensed he wasn't just anyone. The energy around him felt strange, almost authoritative. He had shoulder-length black hair, dark brown eyes, an earring with a dangling angel wing, a white suit with a purple tie, and a scarf with golden crosses embroidered at the bottom. He was intriguing, and I wondered if he was some sort of guardian spirit, so I smiled and waved. He smiled back and pointed behind me. When I turned around, there was nothing there, and when I looked back, he was gone. Puzzled, I meant to tell Stargirl about him but forgot. A few weeks later, my sister and I were alone at home. I had been uneasy because of a dark presence that sometimes followed me, and I was reluctant to go outside to take my dog out. It was pitch black, and I could barely see my hand in front of me. But there, at the end of the driveway, stood the man from my school. This time, he didn't look as kind or calm. Strangely, I could see every detail of him clearly, as though he were illuminated by a spotlight. "Get inside now," he shouted. Without hesitation, I sprinted back inside, shaking and crying. My sister was worried since I rarely get that upset, and as I tried to calm down, I told her, "I'm scared for him. I'm scared for Israfel." The name had somehow just come to me. My sister gave me a strange look. "Who?" she asked. "Israfel, the man outside. I feel like he's in danger." I moved to go back outside to check, but she held me back, assuring me that if he was protecting me, he'd be safe. She sat me down, and we watched cartoons together until I finally started to relax. Later that night, I heard Israfel's voice again. He apologized for scaring me and said the dark presence shouldn't bother me anymore. He also confirmed his name was indeed Israfel and seemed pleased that I had known it. Since then, he's been around, following me and occasionally speaking to me, especially when I'm feeling sick or need comfort. He rarely says much, but he'll smile when I notice him, and if I'm angry at someone, he seems to share in my frustration. As the last day of school approached in May, I still hadn't told Stargirl about Israfel, worried she might try to get rid of him. On that last day, I was hanging out with Stargirl and a few other friends. When the others left to take pictures, it was just the two of us. Suddenly, Stargirl gave me a wide-eyed look. "Train," she whispered, "that's my nickname. There's someone behind you." I turned to see Israfel standing nearby and instantly panicked. I grabbed Stargirl's bag, knowing she kept a cross in there, and begged her not to do anything. She looked terrified and demanded I make him go away, or she'd do it herself. Israfel looked heartbroken as he left, and I felt an overwhelming sadness as he disappeared. When I was young, I grew up in a rough neighborhood, and there were always whispers about the townhouses we lived in. Rumor had it that they were built on an old, abandoned Native American cemetery. I dismissed it as a local myth. Nothing paranormal had ever happened to me, and as a kid, my imagination often got the best of me. The house made strange noises at night, but it was old, and the floors creaked with every step. We also rented out a few rooms over the years to friends who would often get up at odd hours, so anytime I heard something strange, I assumed it was them. My cousin, who was my best friend, lived nearby. This story takes place when I was around 5 years old, sometime after Christmas. He'd come over to play with a new race car track I got as a gift, but my sister, being a bit of a brat back then, she's awesome now, came over, shooed me away, and convinced my cousin to play with her instead. I ran to my mom in tears, complaining about how they'd taken over my toy. At the time, I had a strong belief in God since I was raised Catholic. My mom tried to comfort me, saying my sister and cousin would learn a small lesson from God for being rude and taking my toy. Feeling reassured, I stayed with her in the kitchen as she cooked dinner. By the time dinner was ready, it was dark outside. My sister and cousin rushed downstairs when my mom called for dinner, and though I was still a bit annoyed with them, I silently waited for this lesson my mom mentioned. As we sat down to eat, suddenly, all the lights in the house flickered off. Scared, I clung to my mom's waist. Then we heard a strange noise coming from the living room, which was next to the kitchen. We quickly went to check it out and saw the TV screen glowing faintly. The strange part was what was on it, an eerie red outline of a horned face. It was there for just a moment, then vanished with a loud boom. A gust of wind blew through the room, even though all the doors and windows were shut. My mom glanced toward the large windows, and her face changed. She quickly ushered us back into the kitchen, her gaze fixed on something outside. Curious, I asked her what she saw, and her description left me stunned. She said it had a beaked face, goat-like horns, wings, and that it descended into a flaming hole in the ground. She told me, in a hushed voice, that it was the devil. As if on cue, we heard a deep, eerie laughter outside the window. Moments later, the lights came back on, and my dad walked into the kitchen, unfazed. We explained what we had just seen, but he was skeptical, dismissing it as nothing. Apparently, the lights in the garage, where he'd been, had stayed on the entire time. I was left wondering if this strange event was somehow the lesson my mom had mentioned. But I was baffled. Why would it be a lesson from God, but show a vision of Satan? For a while, I thought maybe my mom had played a trick on us, though I couldn't see how, since I'd been with her in the kitchen the whole time. This memory rarely comes back to me, usually when I think of that old house. I'm not frightened by it, nor have I experienced any other paranormal events in my life. My dad still owns the house, and we rent it out, but the tenants haven't reported any strange encounters or weird experiences there. My 10 years living there were normal, aside from that one bizarre night. The strangest part, though, is that no one else remembers it. My cousin, my sister, and even my mom, all of them have no recollection of it. My dad doesn't even remember us telling him what happened, but I remember it vividly, and I'm absolutely certain it wasn't a dream. We even talked about it for a few days afterward. So why am I the only one who remembers? After a long day at school, Eric and I went home to unwind. By evening, we decided to check out the old farmhouse. As we got closer, I thought I saw a shadowy figure standing on the balcony. The streetlights nearby were out, so it was dark, and I figured it was just my eyes playing tricks. We parked and got out, shining our flashlights toward the house. We didn't go in, we were just scouting the place. Eric panned his flashlight over the windows, and then we both saw it. A white figure standing inside, motionless. When I shined my light directly at it, it stayed put, clear as day. Surprised, we moved closer, and right in front of our eyes, the figure disappeared. Then, suddenly, a pack of dogs seemed to burst from the darkness, barking and rushing toward us. We bolted back to the truck and sped away. The next day, we told our friends at school. Most of them believed us. A few didn't. That night was homecoming, and after a big win, with me as MVP, we decided to keep the celebration going at the farmhouse. Lots of people showed up, and we partied there until around 5 in the morning. As the night wound down and we began to clean up, we heard heavy footsteps upstairs, like someone was walking around. We figured it was just one of our friends, but there were only 6 of us left, and we were all downstairs. Suddenly, we heard a scream, and we ran upstairs to find one of our friends being lifted off the ground and slammed against the wall by some unseen force. She was screaming, and we just stood there, helpless, until she finally dropped to the floor. Terrified, we left immediately, leaving everything behind. Later that night, we returned to pick up what we'd left. The house was dark, but we unlocked the door and switched on the lights. To our horror, blood red writing on the walls read, "Leave now or die." The blood looked fresh, and despite thinking it might be a prank, we couldn't help feeling scared. Thomas, Rosie, and Ashley went upstairs to grab the rest of our things, and we were nearly ready to leave when the lights began to flicker. Windows slammed open, doors banged shut, and the room became total chaos. Frozen in fear, we watched as the lights flickered one last time, then cut out, leaving us in darkness. Panicked, we rushed to the front door, but it was locked. Our flashlights became our only hope as we searched for a way out, only to find every window and door tightly shut. Then, from the stairs, a dark figure began to descend. We all screamed. Finally, the door burst open, and we scrambled outside. As we ran to our cars, I glanced back and saw that same white figure in the window, only now she was covered in blood, her once white garment soaked. She appeared transparent, her face indistinct, but in her hand, she clutched a knife, moving slowly toward the front porch. We didn't stick around to see more, but the horror didn't end there. Eric and I got home around midnight, and as soon as we stepped out of the car, 2 knives came flying toward us from nowhere. I managed to duck, but Eric was hit in the chest. I looked around, but there was no one else around. The second knife landed in my front seat. I called an ambulance, but Eric passed away a few days later. It was devastating, and to this day, I can't understand why it happened. The tragedy didn't stop with Eric. Years later, Thomas died in a car accident. A couple of years after that, Ashley and Rosie were killed in a plane crash on their way to a modeling job. I'm the only one left from that night. The far house was demolished, leaving just an empty lot. But the memories linger, vivid and haunting. It's a tragic story, and sometimes I wonder if that night at the far house set everything in motion. Recently, while discussing the paranormal with a close friend, he asked, "What's the weirdest thing that's ever happened to you?" It's a question I'd answered countless times before, but this time I hesitated, letting my usual reply die on my lips. After a couple of weeks of mulling it over, I decided to share an experience from my past that I hadn't spoken about in years. It happened back in high school when I had a babysitting job 3 days a week. Paid well and the kids were great. The house was only about a mile from school, so I'd walk over right after my last class, always getting there early in case their mom needed to leave early. Everything worked out perfectly, but this particular day was different. Felt like one long chain of intense déjà vu. I could predict what would happen in each class at lunch and during breaks. By the time the school day was over, I'd stopped mentioning it to anyone, choosing instead to just watch as events unfolded exactly as I'd felt they would. It was thrilling, and by the time I headed to my babysitting job, I was almost getting used to it. I took my usual shortcut through a wooded area we called the Hollow. I'd walked this route countless times when there wasn't snow on the ground, and today was no different. The Hollow led to the road that would take me up to the house. If you overshot that road, you'd fall into a steep ravine that dropped into a creek. So I took my usual path up the hill. About halfway up, though, things started to feel wrong. I was surrounded by familiar scenery, yet nothing looked familiar. I stopped, confused. It was like walking out your own back door only to find yourself in an entirely different place. I looked back toward the highway. It was gone. My surroundings, once so familiar, had become unrecognizable. Starting to panic, I decided to turn around and head back through the Hollow to the main road, hoping to shake off the strange feeling. When I reached the other side of the Hollow, everything looked normal again. I took a deep breath, telling myself it was just my imagination. But doubts began to creep in. Was I losing my grip on reality? In an attempt to reassure myself, I decided to take the shortcut one more time, convinced that it would all look the way it should. This time, everything was back to normal. The highway was visible, the houses were where they were supposed to be, and I arrived at the family's front door without further incident. When I went inside, the kid's mother looked at me with concern. "You don't look so well," she said, and when I glanced in the mirror, I could see why. I looked different, almost darker somehow. She kindly offered to drive me home, and I accepted. Whatever was happening, I didn't want the kids to be caught up in it. When I got home, I went straight to bed. The next day, I woke up feeling fine, and I didn't tell a soul about what happened for years, until a couple of months ago. For some reason, I decided to share the story with my friend. We talked through possible explanations, exploring every theory we could imagine. Then he pointed out something I hadn't considered. That when I'd looked in the mirror that day, I'd said I didn't look like myself, and it reminded him of a story I told him before, where I looked into a mirror and saw my sister's face reflected back instead of my own. Curious, he asked if I remembered anyone going missing or passing away around the time of the incident. It had been so long ago that I couldn't think of anyone, but I decided to reach out to a friend who worked for the local paper to see if he knew of any records. Unfortunately, he came up empty. Feeling frustrated but unwilling to let it go, I took a long shot and looked up the family I used to babysit for. Surprisingly, the family was still in town, and when I called, the mother, now much older, came to the phone. After catching up, I took a deep breath and asked if she remembered the day she had driven me home instead of having me babysit. I held my breath, almost regretting the question. What were the odds she would even remember? But after a pause, she quietly said yes, she remembered. It was the day her sister, Betty, had passed away. She told me she'd never forget it because had she gone to work that night, she would have missed the call. I was speechless. I felt foolish trying to explain why I had asked, but she listened to my story in silence. When we finished, she said softly, "You remind me so much of Pat right now. Pat was my mother." That comment brought me to tears. My friend helped me process what happened by sharing his own theory, filling in gaps that I had never considered. Imagine Betty had just passed away, her spirit entering a new world but suddenly knowing everything about her life. Every question answered. She wants to see her sister one last time, to bring comfort without revealing the tragedy that had happened. Newly in the spirit world, she senses that someone her sister trusts is nearby, someone who can help her into the house without raising alarm. That someone is you. But being new to the spirit world, Betty's spirit is still learning the delicate balance of moving between realms. Spirits have a different kind of energy, strong, pulsing, and their presence needs to be subtle or it can easily overwhelm. When she approached you, she was unintentionally too intense, creating a powerful disruption, almost like buzzing the tower. She didn't mean to disable your sense of place or reality. She simply came on too strong. Realizing this, she backed off, letting you reorient yourself and return to normal. She followed quietly, finally able to reach her sister's house. Maybe she just wanted to be close to her sister one last time, even if just for a few moments. I was 12 when my father and I moved into a rental house nearby, just around the block from the home he and my stepmother had shared for the past 8 years. They were in the early stages of a divorce, and this new place was our temporary refuge. The house had an odd setup, a small laundry room detached in the backyard. It felt like a novelty, and I eventually convinced my dad to let me use it as my bedroom. Our first night there, I slept in the second bedroom inside the house. I couldn't shake the unnerving feeling of being watched, but I eventually drifted off. Once settled into the laundry room, I arranged my bunk bed, a sturdy white frame with a slightly bent guardrail that would rock if you nudged it. Every night, as I lay there in the stillness, I'd hear a faint, persistent scratching from the corner closest to my head. It was so soft it could only be heard in complete silence, yet it was constant, lulling me to sleep each night as I tried to figure out its source. This became my nightly routine for months. Then, one night, my older brother came to visit. He joined me in the laundry room, taking the bottom bunk. We talked about the scratching noise, which he insisted didn't exist, before we fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke to a faint noise but thought nothing of it and dozed off. Moments later, I was jolted awake again by the distinct sound of my guardrail bouncing back into place. I opened my eyes, just in time to see it settle with 2 small bounces. Dismissing it as a fluke, I closed my eyes again, but before I could drift off, I heard the rail creaking, slowly lifting toward my face. This time, I shot my eyes open, watching as the rail hovered just inches from me. I stayed frozen, watching it for 10 or 15 seconds until it suddenly fell back, bouncing slightly. Terrified, I sat up to look over the rail, half expecting to see my brother playing a prank. But he was fast asleep, facing the wall, completely covered by his blanket, snoring softly. I leaned back, only to see the rail rise again on its own. I grabbed hold of it, determined to keep it in place, but it continued to lift, despite my grip. I pressed it down harder, using my entire weight, but the force against me only grew, causing the rail and eventually the entire bed to shake violently. At that moment, my brother woke up, yelling for me to stop shaking the bed, and everything ceased. I scrambled off the top bunk, ran to the light switch, and sat on the floor, explaining to my brother what had just happened. He listened, humoring me, but I could tell he didn't really believe it. The next day, I told my father, but he brushed it off as a draft or my imagination. I tried to explain that the windows and doors had been shut tight, and that no breeze could lift a 5-pound guardrail, but he dismissed the idea. I never set foot in that room again, opting instead for the second bedroom inside the house. A couple of months later, I woke up early one morning to see my brother off to summer school. After he left, I crawled back into bed and quickly fell into a vivid dream. I was running, fleeing from something unknown, racing through the front door, out the back door, across the alley, then back into the front door in an endless loop, accompanied by a deep, demonic laughter and the clanging of chains. I jolted awake in sheer terror, bolting upright and attempting to get out of bed, only to feel my sheets tighten around me, yanking me back down onto the mattress. The laughter from my dream continued, loud and menacing, echoing in the room. It felt like something was restraining me, laughing with increased satisfaction. Within seconds, I fell back into a heavy, dreamless sleep, despite my pounding heart. An hour later, I was woken by the ringing phone. Shaken, I answered. It was my friend Jason, asking if I could come over because he'd seen something strange in his room. I rushed to get dressed, the feeling of being watched lingering as I left the house. Only when the house was out of sight did the sensation ease. After that experience, I moved to the living room couch, hoping for some relief. Months passed, and by then we had adopted a Rottweiler puppy and a calico kitten. One night, as I lay asleep on the couch, I was startled awake. I lifted my head, glancing at the vertical blinds by the sliding glass door. They swayed as if someone had just been holding them open, releasing them a split second before I looked. I dismissed it, thinking one of the pets had brushed against them, until I noticed the puppy sleeping at my feet and the cat resting on my chest. With all I had witnessed, though, this small incident barely bothered me. The last few months in that house were relatively quiet, and soon we moved out for good. Looking back, that strange room, the tightening sheets, and those unexplainable chills remain some of the most vivid memories of my childhood. One night, as I was dozing off, I heard a voice call my name, Henry. It sounded just like my mother. Thinking she needed something, I mumbled back, "What, Mom?" The voice replied, "Henry." I responded again, "What, Mom?" On the third call of Henry, I finally yelled back, "What, Mom?" But the voice didn't reply again, and I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I asked my mom if she'd been calling me, and she said she hadn't called for me at all that night. The next strange experience I remember happened when I was about 6 or 7. My uncle, who I adored, had passed away, but my parents hadn't told me since I was so close to him. We were in Amsterdam at the time and flew back to the US for the funeral. When we arrived, I didn't know who the service was for and spent my time looking around for my uncle. As we approached the casket to pay our respects, I was surprised to see a man with long, dark brown hair and a goatee, not my uncle. I sat back down, confused. A bit later, when my cousins arrived, someone mentioned that Frankie had died. Hearing that, I went up again to look at the casket. This time, I saw my uncle, clean-shaven with his usual black hair. I couldn't explain why I saw two different people, but I've always believed that first person may have been Jesus, as if God was showing me that my uncle was in heaven. Another time, when I was around 13 and living in Moreno Valley, California, I had a more unsettling experience. I was in bed when I felt pressure on the mattress near my feet, as if someone were sitting there. Unsure if it was my imagination, I stared at the spot, and again, the bed sank down as if someone was seated by my feet. Terrified, I leapt out of bed and ran straight to my parents' room. The next morning, my dad told me that our dog had been barking outside his and my mom's bedroom window that night, waking him up. When he opened his eyes, he saw a dark shadow hovering over him that quickly zoomed out through their door and down the hallway toward my room. It seemed that whatever was in my room pushing down my bed was connected to that shadow my dad had seen. Soon after, we had people come over to pray in my room and bless it. But I was still too afraid to sleep there, so I started sleeping in the living room. Oddly, a new phenomenon began. Every night as I lay down to sleep, I heard a beautiful choir singing. I checked the TV, the radio, and even my bedroom, but everything was off. For about a week, I'd fall asleep each night to the sound of this choir singing. It was calming and brought me peace. At that same house, another incident occurred. I was watching a TV show about a boy who lost his dog, only to have it returned to him. Deeply moved, I went outside and prayed, "God, please send my dog back to me." My dog had been missing for months. That night, I dreamed I found him, and he was barking in my dream. I woke up to the sound of barking in real life. Rushing to the backyard, I found my dog on the other side of the fence, barking. Felt like a miracle come true. When I was around 15 in Victorville, California, I had another strange encounter. I was spending the night at a friend's house, and his sister's friends were over. One of them, standing outside with us, placed his beer bottle on the hood of his car. Out of nowhere, the bottle began to spin slowly, then tipped over and spun rapidly as if on its own. He grabbed it, looked at me, and asked, "Did you see that?" I nodded, equally bewildered. Most recently, in my current home in Hemet, California, I was getting ready for bed and brushing my teeth in the bathroom. Suddenly, it felt like someone had swung their hand and moved the shower curtain. I looked up, but no one was there. I recently visited the Santa Monica Library, which houses an incredible archive of publications dating back to the early 20th century. There, I finally found ample information about the mysterious events I'd been researching, which helped dispel my skepticism. Still, I wanted to hear from the residents of the building where these strange occurrences had supposedly taken place. When I visited, I found the residents to be friendly and eager to share their stories, as if they were relieved to finally have someone to listen. Without further ado, here is the story they told. Charlie Chaplin once owned several of the grand buildings along the famous Venice Beach boardwalk in Los Angeles. In Chaplin's era, these buildings served as bathhouses and upscale lodging for vacationers. Today, they've been converted into apartments occupied by artists, musicians, and other creatives who call Venice Beach home. One of these iconic structures, nestled among them, is 26 Westminster Avenue, a location well documented in print and Chaplin's films, where he often shot scenes for his early movies. In 1915, during the filming of By the Sea, Chaplin's longtime body double mysteriously vanished from the set. The production was halted for 3 days while a search was launched. When no trace of him turned up, it was assumed he had quit abruptly. The studio funding the film was losing money with each day, so Chaplin was forced to find a replacement and continue with production. Exactly 7 days after the disappearance, Chaplin, with an entourage by his side, returned to his dressing room, located in the basement of the now famous building at 26 Westminster Avenue. To his horror, they discovered the body of Chaplin's body double lying on the floor, bound at the wrists and ankles, soaking wet and entangled in seaweed. He appeared to have been dead for several days. How he ended up in Chaplin's dressing room after being missing for nearly a week remains a mystery to this day. Current residents of the building report a number of unsettling phenomena. Some hear the sound of footsteps splashing through shallow water, while others describe faint, desperate cries for help. More chilling are the frequent sightings of a man, bound at the hands and feet, standing in the dim, shadowed corners of the building. But perhaps the most unnerving detail is his attire. He's dressed just as he was the day he disappeared. A tuxedo coat with tails, a bow tie, and the classic black derby hat, resembling Chaplin himself. To this day, those who live in the building wonder if they're catching glimpses of the body double who met his untimely end, or if perhaps they're haunted by something even darker. When I was around 13, I had my first unexplained encounter. I was playing video games alone in the living room with the radio on. My dad was upstairs in his room. Out of nowhere, a gray shadow moved from one end of my computer screen to the other, and I felt it pass through me. I was already a bit freaked out, but as soon as the shadow vanished, an ad on the radio began with, "Do you believe in ghosts?" I was terrified. At 15, my family moved to a new apartment with my mom and brother. Little things started happening, like the patio door locking itself, which required a specific nail to lock. Once, we received a promotional mailer from a car company that would play an engine sound if pressed. One night, while I was studying alone, the engine sound went off by itself. A few days later, it happened again when my brother was home alone. Maybe it was just a malfunction, but it was odd. Another strange incident occurred when my mom decided to get rid of an old trunk of toys. Among them was a life-size doll that would play music when turned on. My mom packed everything in a bag and left it in the living room. On the last day, while my brother and I were home alone, the doll suddenly started playing its tune. After that, we put the entire bag outside. My brother and I would also occasionally claim to see each other around the house, even when one of us was actually away. My brother once told me he saw me walking in the hallway, but I was 45 minutes away at the time. When I was 16, my beloved cat, an orange tabby with white spots, passed away. Soon after, I visited a friend's house to work on a project. As she opened the door, I noticed an orange tabby lounging on her couch and excitedly pointed it out. She looked at me, confused, and said she didn't have a cat. When I looked again, the cat was gone. Oddly enough, I now have an orange tabby, and I sometimes wonder if that was a glimpse of my future cat. At 19, I was washing dishes alone in the kitchen when I felt something rub against my calf, as if a cat had brushed past. Startled, I turned around, but nothing was there. The next year, I received news that a childhood classmate had passed away. I felt devastated and guilty since an old friend had emailed me about the funeral, but I hadn't received it due to an internet outage. That night, I dreamt that I saw him and, feeling shy, tried to avoid him. He approached me, smiled, and said, "Don't be shy. Give me a hug." I woke up, realizing he was really gone. At 22, I took in a homeless cat. Sadly, she passed away during surgery when I took her to be spayed. Grieving, I decided to adopt another cat and was torn between two at the shelter. The night before I had to choose, I dreamt of my recently deceased cat. I couldn't adopt her, but I saw the orange tabby playing with my roommate's cat. I took this as a sign and adopted the orange tabby, who has brought me so much joy. At 26, a longtime friend of mine moved in as my roommate. She brought in her late father's couches, a bittersweet reminder of him. One evening, I sat down to watch TV alone, noticing her dog's chew toy on the armrest of the couch. After a few seconds, the toy started rolling down the armrest, upright, as if something unseen had nudged it. I looked around. My roommate and her dog were both sound asleep, and my cat was in my room. Recently, another strange thing happened while I was at my boyfriend's house. He had gone downstairs to watch TV because the cable upstairs was choppy. A few minutes after he left, the TV in his room turned on, playing a commercial for about 10 seconds, then turned off. When I went to check, no one was there, and the cable was still glitchy. This was the first time I had two experiences so close together, just a month apart. For the past few years, I've also felt something jump onto my bed as I'm lying in it, like my cat curling up, but when I look, there's nothing there. I even traveled to Vietnam a few years back, certain I'd have some kind of experience there. Oddly, nothing happened to me, but my brother had his own unexplained encounter. Monday morning, it started with a loud series of knocks on my bedroom door. I assumed it was my dad stopping by to grab something, so I got up and opened the door, but no one was there. Monday evening, 5 to 7 p.m., I was home alone in the den, sitting at my computer, bored and half-heartedly reading some online gossip with music playing in the background. As the song ended, I heard a noise behind me. When I turned around, I saw my thick vertical blinds moving, almost as if a breeze was coming through the window. But the fan was off and I knew the window was closed because I never opened it. A moment later, the blinds settled back into place. It left me uneasy, but I brushed it off and went about my evening. Tuesday, 3 a.m. That night, I was home alone and in a deep sleep when a strange, growling noise pulled me out of my rest. At first, I thought I'd simply woken myself up with a loud snore. Still half asleep, I decided to ignore it and go back to sleep. The light was still on in my room, something I kept on for comfort due to past experiences, and I glanced at my phone as I turned off my 3 a.m. alarm. I settled back into bed, but the growling started again, louder this time. As I opened my eyes, I saw a white, blurry figure standing directly across from me, right by my head. I was lying on my side, and the figure appeared slightly out of focus, but I could clearly see the dresser behind it. I blinked several times, thinking I was still half asleep and imagining things, but it stayed there. I could just make out its mouth, which opened a little as it growled. Its head seemed unusually long, its mouth disturbingly wide, with what looked like pointed teeth, though I couldn't be certain because of the blur. I tried to close my eyes, hoping to fall back asleep, but the growling didn't stop. It grew louder and seemed to move along the side of my bed, following the line of my body. Then only the front half of my body went numb, and I couldn't tell if it was sleep paralysis or if I just didn't dare move. I started to pray, but my voice was barely a whisper against the overpowering growling. I kept praying, each word harder to say, as the growling intensified, making me feel weaker. Finally, I forced out a loud prayer my mother had taught me, and the growling abruptly stopped. I lay there, my heart pounding, trying to go back to sleep, but it happened twice more that night. Exhausted, I rolled over, glancing at the clock. It was 4 a.m. I told myself it was probably just a side effect of a video game I'd been playing, even though the growling and the figure weren't in the game at all. Sometime between 4 to 5:30 a.m. I have mild carpal tunnel syndrome, so pain in my hands sometimes wakes me up. Normally, when I need to turn over, I wake up fully, shift, and then go back to sleep. But this time, I woke up already on my stomach, which is unusual for me. My arm from the hand to mid-forearm was tingling, but what really confused me was how cold I felt. I sleep with 3 covers, 2 heavy and 1 light, but when I reached down to pull them up, they were neatly folded down just above my knees. It's one thing to kick covers off in the night, but this was different. The covers were perfectly folded in a fan shape, as if someone had carefully pulled them down. I don't make my bed like that ever, and usually if I push covers off, it's only one leg and I'm awake for it. But this was precise. I remember lying there, thinking, what on earth just happened? The house was a classic 1950s ranch-style home with a sprawling backyard, a swimming pool, and an olive tree that had been growing there since the 1800s. Our neighborhood was built on land sold off from Workman Ranch, a historic property about a mile away, now marked by a small park called Shadow Ranch. My first strange experience in that house happened when I was about 3 years old. I walked into my bedroom, turned on the light, and saw a shadow on the floor. A dark shape curled up in a fetal position. It was almost 3-dimensional, with the outline of a man, and it seemed to hover there for about 10 seconds before swirling away. I wasn't scared then. I just stared at it, transfixed. Even now, I can remember it as clearly as if it had just happened. After that, things only got stranger. Over the next few months, I developed a deep fear of my bedroom. I couldn't explain why, but I always felt uneasy there. After a lot of pleading and tears, my parents finally let me sleep in their room. I made a little bed for myself on the floor at the foot of their bed, with my feet toward the doorway. One night, I woke up with a sharp, burning pain on the bottom of my foot. When I looked up, I saw a shadow person standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching me. This time, the fear was intense and unforgettable, a feeling that would come and go throughout my years in that house. There were smaller, unsettling occurrences too. Sometimes, while I was alone in my parents' room, I'd watch the bunny ears on our old TV set spin in slow circles by themselves. I never told my parents about the shadow people I saw or about my fear. But as the years passed, the house continued to show its darker side. When I was 6 or 7 and my younger brother was about 4, we had a small Nerf basketball hoop on top of my bedroom door. One day we were playing, trying to make baskets with the foam ball, when it got stuck between the top of the door and the hoop. I stood on a table to reach it, but the next thing I remember, my dad was pulling me down, freeing my head from the hoop. Somehow, I'd ended up with my head caught on top of the door, a height I shouldn't have been able to reach even standing on the table. It felt like something in that house had tried to hurt me. After that, I finally began telling my parents how scared I felt there, though I kept quiet about the shadow people. For a few years, there were other small but disturbing occurrences. A reddish stain that would appear in the corner of my parents' ceiling. No matter how many times it was bleached, painted over, or respackled, the stain always came back. We eventually moved out after my sister was born, but as I got older, I began to talk more openly with my parents about the old house, as we called it. My dad isn't one to believe in ghosts, but he admitted that something about that house was weird. My mom told me how, shortly after we moved in, a neighbor shared the dark history of the place. Apparently, in the 1960s, 3 drug dealers had lived there. During a party one night, someone they owed money to came in with a shotgun and killed all 3 of them. Back then, realtors didn't have to disclose if a property had been the site of a murder. Every so often, I still think about that house, wondering if the people who live there now have experienced anything similar. Sometimes I even drive by, just to see it, and wonder what I'd find if I ever went back inside. But for now, I think I'll let my memories of the old house be enough. I'm a writer, and my friend Susan keeps a backup of my manuscript on a flash drive in a fireproof safe. It's a way to ensure my work isn't lost if anything happens to my computer. Only Susan, her son, and her daughter-in-law have access to the safe, and neither of them has any reason to tamper with my files. So, every time I update the manuscript, it should just be a simple swap of files, no surprises. One weekend, Susan had gone across the state to visit her sister's grave, and I finished the last chapter of my book. I saved each chapter as a separate document, and the final chapter was simply titled 40 Chapter.01. I organized my files in folders of 5 chapters each, with the last folder labeled 40+, because it contained only Chapter 40 and the epilogue. When Susan came back, she brought over the flash drive so I could update it. I opened Chapter 40 from my computer and selected Save as to update it onto the flash drive in the 40+ folder. But when I opened the folder, I noticed something strange. A document I hadn't created, labeled simply 41. There was no Chapter 41 in my book. And if I had created a placeholder, it would have been labeled 41 Chapter.01 to keep with my filing system. The document was just named 41. Out of nowhere. Curious, I tried to save Chapter 40 first. But as I clicked Save, an unexpected message popped up. 4041sts already exists. Do you want to replace it? That made no sense. No file with the name 4041sts existed on my computer or the flash drive, and I had never named anything like that. I couldn't figure out why my computer was asking to replace a file with a name I'd never created, especially in a completely different folder. I canceled the save and turned back to the mystery file 41 on the flash drive. When I opened it, the only thing on the page was the words 41, centered at the top. The rest of the document was blank. I was startled. I always start chapters halfway down the page, with chapter spelled out in capital letters. If I'd created this document, it would have been titled Chapter 41, and the heading wouldn't have been at the very top of the page. My first thought was that Susan's daughter-in-law had decided to play a prank. But as soon as I deleted the file, I regretted it. I hadn't checked the date it was created, and now whatever strange clue it held was gone. I checked the flash drive's properties to see when it was last updated 4 months ago, long before my wrist injury had put me out of commission. Susan was waiting in the next room, so I went to ask if she had an explanation. She assured me that nobody had touched the drive while it was locked in the safe. Besides, she said, who would mess with it? And if they did, why leave something so strange like this behind? Confused, I said, But I never wrote a chapter 41. I outlined 40 chapters, that's it. And I would never format a chapter heading like that. Susan froze. 41? That's the year my sister was born, she said slowly. The sister you visited this weekend? I asked. She nodded. Yes, and my brother was born in 1940. Suddenly, the strange message and phantom file seemed like something more. A deliberate communication. Could her sister be trying to send her a message through my work? I think someone's trying to reach you, Susan, I said. That might explain the strange save message about 4041sts when I tried saving chapter 40. How could the computer name a non-existent file with such a specific number? Susan's face softened. Maybe you're right. I'd like to believe it, she murmured. I hadn't been able to find my brother, and I always figured he might have passed away. So, maybe they're together. That's when she told me that the cemetery had called her earlier that day. Her sister's headstone had been damaged and was removed temporarily for repairs. It was just another strange coincidence in this unusual string of events. I wish I hadn't deleted the file before checking when it was created, I said. No, she replied, almost relieved. This is spooky enough. I think knowing the exact date would have been too much. Thinking about it later, I wondered why the message had appeared on my flash drive. If Susan's sister was trying to reach her, maybe she knew the flash drive was the quickest way to communicate. And since she'd passed before the computer age, it made sense that she wouldn't have used capitalization or formatting, just 41, as best as she could manage from the other side. I'd taken computer science classes in college and had learned early on that computers can only process the information users give them. They can't create files on their own. And yet here was an impossible file with a deeply personal connection to Susan, something I would never have known. If this had happened on a different day, it wouldn't have meant as much. But given the timing, right after her sister's headstone went missing, the message seemed deliberate, meaningful. It was as if her sister had found a way to reach out, just to let Susan know she was still there, with family by her side. A few months ago, I had my first experience with something that went beyond my usual lucid dreams. As someone who has been an avid lucid dreamer for years, I'm very aware of the different states of consciousness, and I've frequently experienced sleep paralysis. But this encounter took a different, more intense turn. I'd fallen asleep on the couch and found myself in the middle of a vivid, highly sexual dream. I became lucid, aware that I was in a dream, and then also became conscious of my physical body lying on the couch. I could sense the familiar sounds around me, my cat asleep above my head and the soft chirping of birds outside. But I felt something else, an intense sensation of being penetrated, deeply and roughly, yet somehow I found myself enjoying it. I assumed it was just part of the lucid experience. Then I heard it, a voice, low and dirty, speaking to me, roughly, violently, and it knew my name. My eyes were shut each time it spoke, but at one point, I opened my eyes and could still hear it. For a moment, I felt unsettled and tried to wake myself up, finally breaking free from the paralysis. Though I wasn't frightened, I knew this was no ordinary lucid dream. The next time it visited was only a week ago. That day, my roommate randomly mentioned that his girlfriend had been molested in her sleep by an entity for years until it stopped when she moved. The timing was uncanny. I thought of my own recent experience but kept quiet. That night, I was lying in bed on my side when I felt something penetrate me from behind. Just once, but it startled me to the point I nearly jumped out of bed. I wasn't scared, though. Instead, I calmly thought, "No, not there," and rolled onto my stomach, trying to go back to sleep. As I drifted off, I began dreaming again, finding myself in an intimate encounter with another woman. Suddenly, I became aware that I was back in my bed, lying on my stomach. I felt my sheet being gently pulled away, and a sensation like my hips were undulating on their own. An amazing, buzzing energy hovered between my legs, giving me intense pleasure. There was no penetration, only an exquisite, pulsing sensation that felt cosmic, like an otherworldly touch. The entity attempted to speak into my ear, but the whispering tickled too much to make out any words. The feeling stayed concentrated between my legs, and each time I woke up, it lingered, buzzing gently but less intense. It would build again as I drifted back into sleep, with the sheets pulling back and the pleasure starting anew. Each time, if it became overwhelming, I'd ask it to ease up, and it always respected my boundaries. By morning, I felt a tightness in my chest, mostly on the left side. The sensation between my legs lasted hours, and I felt aroused all day. The tightness in my chest lingered, uncomfortable but not painful. Then, just last night, it came back again. First, it was gentle. I was on my stomach and felt it laying over me, pressing down softly, moving in sync with me. This time, it even seemed to grab my hands, pinning me down. I tried to ask its name, and though it tried to answer, the whispering was too faint and ticklish to understand. But then, it got rough, pushing my head toward the wall. I firmly asked it to relax, but it ignored me. I repeated, "Calm down. I'm in control." It responded mentally, "No, I am," and began spinning me quickly, the intense pleasure still radiating through me. I was irritated that it wouldn't listen, so I pushed back, shouting, "No, you are not. I am in control." With that, I broke free, flinging it off. Turning onto my back, I was acutely aware of its presence lingering around me. My body was tingling and warm, but I felt a tightness throughout, as if it had left tension in my joints. I told it out loud that it needed to respect my wishes if it wanted to continue visiting me, adding that I didn't want it there again that night. As I lay there, I had to stretch and crack my joints to relieve the residual tension. Gradually, the tingling subsided to a small area just above my pubic bone. Whenever it flared up, I reminded it firmly, "Not tonight." Eventually, the sensation faded, though the pressure in my chest returned even more intensely than before and remained throughout the night. I'm not sure what it is, an incubus, a succubus, or perhaps both. My first encounter felt distinctly male, but these last two seemed to be connected to dreams with women and involved no penetration, leading me to think it might be a succubus. Despite reading about these entities online, where most experiences sounded frightening or oppressive, I've never felt afraid or powerless. Pushes my limits, but I've always felt in control. While I enjoy the experiences and find myself intrigued by them, I wonder how far I should let it go. I've read that it's risky to encourage them, that they can intrude into waking life, but as long as it respects my boundaries, I don't see the harm. I'm not certain what it wants beyond my energy, but as long as it doesn't interfere with my daily life, I'm willing to keep exploring this strange connection. I'll start by saying that I'm a devout Christian, and I've never done anything that might invite a spirit into my life. As a kid, I would occasionally see ghosts, but they never interacted with me directly. No eye contact, no communication. Now, I'm 16, and recently, strange things have been happening that I can't quite explain. I've tried to understand them both from a religious and scientific perspective, but I'm still not sure what's going on. I thought maybe sharing it would help me find some clarity and, hopefully, a way to stop it. It started when I was 14, soon after I got my own room. One evening, I just finished cleaning when the ceiling fan in the center of my room began shaking violently. We live in Southern California, but there wasn't an earthquake. I stood there, terrified, watching it shake harder than I'd ever seen. After a few moments of standing frozen, I bolted to the living room to tell my sister what happened. We were alone with the rest of the family out shopping. When they got back, I told my parents, but they were skeptical. My other sister, however, believed me. She knew I wouldn't lie about something like this. I tried to forget about it, thinking it would stop, but it didn't. A few months later, I decided to clean my room again, rearranging the furniture so that my bed was beside the dresser. One night, as I lay in bed trying to fall asleep, I suddenly heard a scream. A loud, clear scream so close to my right ear that it jolted me upright. I checked around, thinking it might have been a noise from outside, but the windows were shut. There was nothing there. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. A week later, while I was silently praying, I heard a sharp, tisk sound interrupting me. It wasn't me, as my mouth was tightly shut. These incidents were unnerving, but I told myself they weren't dangerous. I tried to ignore them, My sister, too, had her own experience. One night, while lying awake and listening to music, she felt the distinct sensation of someone sitting on the bed next to her, pressing down as if a whole body were there. The weight was heavy enough to make ripples in the sheets, and my mom and aunt often saw the lights flickering on and off without explanation. These experiences became part of the background of our lives. They weren't harming us, so I just accepted them as strange, isolated events. But when I turned 16, things escalated, and I started digging deeper, researching for answers. One night in January, with no homework or tests to study for, I decided to go to bed early. By then, I'd moved my bed further from the dresser. I fell asleep quickly, but woke up with an intense feeling of something gripping my feet. It wasn't a hand. It felt like an invisible force clamping down on me. Before I knew it, I was being dragged down the bed, my body paralyzed. I could feel the friction of my velvet blanket against my skin as I slid downward. Just as I reached the edge, I woke up fully and managed to sit up. I turned on the lights, terrified, and prayed before going back to sleep. In the morning, I told my sister, and she was as disturbed as I was. Not long after, she told me she'd heard a man's low, groaning voice in the early hours of the morning. I believed her immediately. Later that month, I had the most horrifying experience yet. I was relaxed and happy, with no stress or troubles to speak of. I'd even been out shopping with my sister earlier that day. But as I lay in bed, feeling at ease, I suddenly saw a dark, cloud-like figure in the shape of a human. It didn't speak, but I knew its intent. It wanted to have sex with me. I was completely paralyzed, crying out in my mind for it to stop, but it was undeterred. Just before I felt anything, I directed my thoughts to God, calling out Jesus' name. In that moment, the figure vanished, and I found myself wide awake, looking around the room. The room was exactly as I'd seen it before, but the dark cloud was gone. The strangeness didn't end there. Last month, I woke up from a nap with a slight but painful sensation down there. A sharp, uncomfortable feeling that I couldn't ignore. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. Still, even on other nights, I would feel cold touches on my face. I'd sometimes sleep without blankets because it would get so warm, but on those nights, I would find myself in a state of paralysis, fully conscious but unable to move, until my alarm clock jolted me out of it. I haven't had any recent incidents because of my busy schedule, but I wanted to share my story and see if anyone else had insight or advice. I originally thought these were effects of sleep paralysis, but considering what I've experienced and what my sister has witnessed, I'm not so sure. I need help finding a solution or, at the very least, understanding what I'm dealing with. When I was little, my mom would leave for work around 8 or 9 in the evening, and once she was gone, my dad would give me a shower, wrap me in my Elmo blanket, and tuck me onto the couch to fall asleep. Then he'd head to the shower, leaving me alone for about 20 minutes. I was a fearful kid. The smallest creak or chime of the clock would send my imagination spiraling, convinced there were monsters lurking nearby. I was especially terrified of dolls, particularly Chucky. So, there I'd be, lying on the couch, anxiously waiting for my dad to finish his shower. The couch faced a counter that held an old lamp my dad had inherited from my great-grandmother. It was a unique piece, a wooden lamp featuring a carved sea captain standing by a boat steering wheel, and the wheel could actually spin. That night, I couldn't take my eyes off it. Just as I was about to look away, something caught my attention. A wrinkled, large hand, with thick fingers, reaching for the wheel. It looked like an older man's hand, gripping the wheel and giving it a slow spin. I remember watching, counting as it turned the wheel 7 or 8 times. At first, I thought it was my dad, playing a trick on me. But then I realized I could still hear him singing in the shower, the sound of water splashing echoing down the hall. My whole body tensed, and suddenly, I felt overwhelmingly hot, sweat pouring down my face. Strangely, I wasn't terrified, just in a calm, trance-like state. The hand slowly released the wheel, withdrawing into thin air, and was gone. I never saw it again. I glanced back at the sea captain on the lamp. His wooden smile seemed wider, spookier than ever. Just then, my dad came out of the shower. He asked if I was okay, said my eyes looked like they were about to pop out of my head. Seeing me drenched in sweat, he ended up giving me another shower. I never told him or my mom what I saw that night. A couple of years later, around 2008, I was in middle school. It was broad daylight, and I'd mostly outgrown my childhood fears. My dad's friend, Paul, was over, and they were chatting down the hall. I was sitting on the floor, just a few feet away from that same counter, watching cartoons. I glanced up for a second and saw an elderly man's head, a white-haired, combed-back head, peek out over the counter. It didn't startle me at first. Paul was in his late 50s, so I assumed it was him. After Paul left, I casually asked my dad if Paul had left the room at any point during his visit. My dad looked at me, a bit surprised, and then, almost nervously, said, maybe he did? He didn't sound certain, which seemed strange. My dad wasn't the type to hide things from me. Since then, I haven't seen any mysterious old men in the house. Only Paul and my grandpa, thankfully. That old sea captain lamp is now in the garage, and I can hardly stand to look at it. It's somehow scarier now than when I was a kid. Thanks for reading. I've got a few more stories I might share soon, so stay tuned. On a side note, I just heard my dad moan loudly from the shower. I'll check to see if it was really him, or if I'm just hearing things. When I was 13, I got my first Ouija board. I'd always been fascinated by the paranormal, and the idea that I could communicate with spirits using this simple board from Toys R Us seemed amazing. On the very first night, I made contact with a friendly ghost named Daniel. I remember asking if anyone was there, and the pointer moved almost instantly. This was years ago, so I don't recall all the details, but I remember the initial contact was friendly and easy. Daniel told me he'd died a long time ago, and he mentioned a brother named Charles who had also passed. But unlike Daniel, Charles was mean, mischievous, and very much around. For the next several days, I would come home from school and go straight to the Ouija board to talk to Daniel. Contrary to what people usually say, I didn't need anyone else to help it work. Just the tips of my fingers were enough to make the pointer move immediately. But every session left me utterly drained. I'd sit with Daniel for hours, and by the end of it, I was exhausted in a way I couldn't explain. Over time, I realized that whatever spirit I was talking to was absorbing my energy, and the faster the pointer moved, the more worn out I felt. Then one day, I came home and felt something different in the air. I set up the board and asked for Daniel, but the response I got was, "Daniel is not here." I can't say why, but I immediately asked, "Is this Charles?" The pointer moved to yes. I was cautious at first, aware of Daniel's warnings about his brother. But as we continued talking, Charles didn't seem as bad as I'd expected. He was a bit like those people who have a mean streak but show you just enough of their good side to keep you around. Over time, I began talking to him more than Daniel, developing a strange kind of friendship with him. One day, I had an idea. If I could communicate with spirits through the Ouija board alone, what if I tried it with a pen? Later, I'd learned this was called automatic writing. I grabbed a piece of paper, held the pen loosely in my hand, and waited. After a few seconds, my hand started moving, almost as if it had a mind of its own. I was fascinated and impressed, and I even showed it off to friends at school. One friend once covered my eyes and asked a question, only to watch in horror as my hand wrote out a straight, perfect line of words across the page. For a while, it was thrilling. Even my dad got in on it, asking me to see if the spirits could predict lottery numbers. They actually got 2 out of 3 right, but that's a story for another time. But things took a dark turn. As I grew closer to these entities, their messages became darker, more sinister. They began talking about death, specifically my death. I became scared but also defiant. I'd noticed that as they drained my energy, they seemed able to read my mind. One day, out of frustration, I decided to test it. I'd ask them a question, and just as they were about to answer, I'd think of a random word. Sure enough, they would write out the random word I was thinking. This made them furious. I could feel their anger as they urged me to stop. But whenever I let them write freely, the messages were always the same, urging me to harm myself. After a while, I'd had enough. I realized how dangerous this had become. One day, I took my Ouija board outside, snapped it in half, and threw it in the dumpster. After that, the communications stopped. I never heard from these entities again, and over time, I lost the ability to do automatic writing. Looking back, I never experienced anything dramatic like objects flying across the room or feeling like I was being watched. But I came away from that experience with a powerful lesson. We are surrounded by forces that look for any weakness, any vulnerability to latch onto. These entities will befriend you, gain your trust, and slowly turn on you, feeding off your energy and pushing you toward darker and darker thoughts. They never tell you anything you don't already know, but they twist that knowledge, using it to weaken your spirit. The weaker you get, the stronger they become. But the moment you start to resist, they lose control. They need us to survive, to grow stronger. When my friend invited me to stay with him for the weekend, I agreed and packed a small travel bag with my essentials and my favorite pillow, one I'm particular about and always take great care of. We met up at the room, which had a slightly old-fashioned look but seemed decent enough. There was a small living room with a couch, coffee table, and a TV, along with a hallway that led to a sink, a bathroom, and his bedroom. I'd be sleeping on the couch. Once we arrived, we put down our bags and decided to grab a bite at a nearby restaurant. I specifically remember placing my bag and pillow on the couch before we left, making sure everything was set up for the night. After we ate, we came back to the room and, strangely, my pillow wasn't on the couch anymore. It was lying on the floor, directly in front of the refrigerator, lined up perfectly. It didn't look like it had fallen or been thrown. It looked intentionally placed. I thought it was odd, but shrugged it off and didn't mention it. Later, a mutual friend came by, and the three of us spent the evening hanging out, talking and playing cards. Eventually, we all went out for dinner, then headed back to the room. After our friend left, we got ready for bed. I remember clearly seeing my friend hang the "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door, saying, "I'm putting this up so we can sleep in tomorrow morning." I agreed and we said good night. He went to his room and I settled down on the couch. That's when things took a strange turn. I had a bag of Japanese hard candies my grandma had sent me, and I'd left it on the coffee table. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound and feeling of the entire bag flying across the room and hitting me on the head. Startled, I sat up in the dark, completely confused. I picked up the bag and put it back on the table, feeling unnerved. I got up, turned on the lights, and briefly wondered if my friend had pulled a prank on me. But when I went to his room, the door was slightly open, and I could hear him snoring. So, I returned to the couch, turning on the TV for some comfort. About 15 or 20 minutes later, he came out half asleep and asked why I was up. I started to explain, but he noticed the "Do Not Disturb" sign lying in the middle of the living room floor. He asked if I'd taken it down, but I hadn't touched it. We checked the door, and it was no longer hanging there. He looked as creeped out as I felt, though he tried to play it off. He offered to stay up with me, which I suspect was as much for his comfort as mine. We sat on the couch, playing cards and watching TV, trying to keep our minds off the weirdness. A little later, he went to the bathroom, which had one of those spring-loaded handles that you push down to open. I was waiting for him to come back when I heard his muffled voice from behind the door, though I couldn't make out what he was saying. I kept calling, "What? I can't hear you." But a moment later, he burst out of the bathroom, looking more scared than I'd ever seen him. He immediately asked why I'd been jiggling the bathroom door handle while he was inside. Confused, I told him I hadn't touched it and had just been answering him from the other room. He went pale. We both realized that something else had been moving the handle. By now, it was around 2:30 a.m., and I wanted to grab my things and leave, but I remembered my grandmother's advice about never leaving a haunted place at night, in case spirits follow you. Reluctantly, we decided to stay until morning. As we were sitting there, talking about everything that had happened, I mentioned the strange way my pillow had moved. Suddenly, we heard whistling, a faint, eerie tune that seemed to be coming from somewhere nearby. We checked around, opening the front door, only to find thick fog blanketing everything outside. We couldn't see anyone, and the whistling was louder inside the room than out, which unnerved us even more. I stayed up until daylight, too spooked to sleep. When morning finally came, we checked out, grabbed the hotel's complimentary breakfast, and left. I couldn't stop thinking about the night, so when I got home, I told my family everything. My sister suggested that maybe someone had broken in while we were out, but it didn't make sense. Nothing was stolen, and it wouldn't explain everything else we experienced. Out of curiosity, I decided to call the front desk and ask if they'd ever had reports of strange occurrences in that room. A man answered, and when I mentioned paranormal activity, he said, "Not from that room." His response felt a bit odd, but I thanked him and hung up. I'll never forget that night. It was the strangest, most unsettling experience I've ever had. I'm 20 now, but my experiences with the paranormal began when I was as young as 5. I'd hoped that these encounters would end when I went off to college, but they only got worse. I attend Mills College, a historic all-women's school. Ask around, and you'll hear plenty of ghost stories from students. My first year, though, was worse than I'd expected. It was during my second semester that the nightmares began every single night. In my dreams, I would find myself trapped somewhere. A temple, a house, a hospital room, even my own bedroom, where I'd be violently assaulted by an entity I could only describe as the devil. These dreams were horrifyingly vivid. The smells, the sounds, everything felt so real that I would wake up screaming. The nightmares were relentless. I tried sleeping with the lights on, anything to avoid falling asleep, but exhaustion always won out. As soon as I closed my eyes, he would appear. I called him he because it felt right, like I instinctively knew what he was. His appearance was strange and almost indescribable, but I can remember the parts one saw. Pitch black eyes, a bulk that seemed inhuman, skin that was rough and scaled like a lizard, and a form that seemed part bull, part shadow, part pure malice. He never came alone. Smaller creatures with red, hard skin and black eyes would grab my legs and arms, holding me down so I couldn't escape. When I went home for summer break, I thought the nightmares would finally stop, but they didn't. I share a room with my 3 younger siblings, and in the mornings they started looking at me strangely. One day, my 15-year-old sister finally asked what was going on. She told me that every night I would start screaming, "No, no, stop!" My 17-year-old brother said he heard me moaning, and the youngest thought he was the only one who'd noticed. I told them I was just having bad nightmares, and I asked them to wake me up if it happened again. That night, my sister tried shaking me awake, and I woke up screaming so loudly that my dad rushed in to check on me. I made up an excuse, saying I'd woken to my sister's face and gotten scared. They laughed it off and went back to bed. But what they didn't know was that, just before my sister woke me, I'd felt something in the room. I was paralyzed, and though I could move my upper body, I couldn't get up. There were prickling sensations crawling up my legs and a heavy pressure on my stomach, like something was pinning me down. I wanted to scream, but just as I was about to pray, the entity forced me back to sleep. My second year of college came around, and I had my mom bless my room, which seemed to stop the nightmares. But I could still feel when he was near, lurking in the background, watching. One day, I decided to taunt him, saying, "I bet you're angry because I don't fear you anymore." That night, I came back to my room around 8 p.m. to work on my homework. I heard a growl, low and familiar. Not wanting to deal with him, I grabbed my things and headed to my friend Laura's room to finish up. Later, around midnight, I went back to my room to sleep. I set down my books, got my toothbrush, and went over to the dresser. And then I froze. There, on my new dresser, were 3 deep scratches that ran from the middle all the way down. Heart pounding, toothbrush still in my mouth, I ran to Laura's room, pale and shaking. I told her what I'd seen, and when she saw it for herself, her eyes widened. She grabbed my arm and said, "Let's go. You're sleeping in my room tonight." We didn't even lock my door, we just left. After that, I became so busy with final exams and recovering from an accident and concussion that I didn't have time to worry. But just 3 weeks ago, I saw him again. It was late, 11:34 p.m., and I was leaving my boyfriend's house. As we walked out the back gate, I turned to the left and saw him standing in the shadows. I gasped and stumbled back, gripping the wall, almost falling. My boyfriend caught me, half laughing, and asked if I was okay. I just said, "Yeah, Let's go. But once I was safely in bed, I texted him, I know you don't believe in the paranormal, but he's back. I saw him, and this time he's not playing around. He's taunting me. This presence, this darkness, is still with me. Maybe you could call this an angel story, or maybe something else. But what happened to me that night on the 4th of July, 1982, has stuck with me my entire life. My family and I were celebrating at Huntington Beach, near where Beach Boulevard meets Pacific Coast Highway, a favorite spot for us to watch the fireworks over the ocean. We could see shows from all around, over the waves from the Queen Mary and the Spruce Goose, and on land, fireworks from Disneyland, Angel Stadium, and who knows where else. It was the perfect place. I was just 4 years old, and we'd staked out a big area of the beach with fire pits to hold our extended family. I remember my grandmother walking with me to one of the pits where my great-aunt's family was. While she was chatting, I got away and started playing in the sand nearby. As the sky darkened and the fireworks started, I watched the colors reflect over the waves and felt this intense pull to go touch them. And so, I just walked straight out to the ocean. I must have moved with a purpose because, somehow, I managed to travel over 300 feet to the water's edge without anyone noticing. My memories from that night are scattered and blurry. I remember the walk past the fire pits, the darkening sky, the sound of the waves, and the explosions of fireworks getting bigger, closer. And then nothing. I was found floating out past the breakers. By the time my family noticed I was missing and began searching, it was too late. The next thing I know, I'm hearing that my parents watched lifeguards trying to resuscitate me. Later, my mom told me that a woman had brought me to the station. She had been swimming beyond the breakers when I bumped into her. She brought me to shore, handed me to the lifeguards, and then went back out to swim. No one saw her again, and no one knew who she was. Naturally, after that, we went straight home. Growing up, my parents never spoke about the incident in much detail. But the memories, like dreams, stayed with me. From the time I was about 8 or 10, I had reoccurring dreams about it, almost like my mind was trying to remember something. The same images would come back. My grandmother and I walking past the fire pits, the flashes over the water, and that feeling of wanting to touch the fireworks. I dreamed of the waves, the lights, and then nothingness. When I was around 11, I finally asked my mom about it. I needed to know what had really happened that night. She shared her memory of it, describing the rescue from her perspective. But she added a detail I hadn't known. The woman who'd saved me was a stranger, someone who just happened to be swimming out there at the perfect time. Somehow, that little detail, the unknown woman, only deepened the mystery for me. Over the years, my mom came to believe that my rescuer was an angel, and honestly, I liked that answer too. Maybe she was just a woman, a night swimmer who happened to be in the right place at the right time, out enjoying the view of the fireworks over the waves. But what are the odds? The timing had to be absolutely perfect for me to survive. If not for her, I wouldn't be here. Looking back, I wonder if that moment was somehow a turning point, like the beginning of something bigger. I've had an unusually active life when it comes to the supernatural, and maybe that night marked the start of it all. We had about 6 weeks before moving into our new place, so my family and I stayed at my grandparents' house, which was conveniently 1 street over. My grandparents were notorious pack rats, so there was only 1 bedroom we could use. I shared the room with my husband and young son, while my daughter's crib was placed just outside our door in the large living room area. The layout was a bit unusual. The hallway was shaped like an L, with our bedroom at the end of the short turn, and a pocket door leading into the living room right by our room. My daughter's crib was set up just on the other side of that door. My grandfather had always hated anyone using that pocket door. When we were kids, he went to great lengths to block it, even drilling a hole in the corner, sliding a peg through, and locking it with an eyelet to make sure we had to walk all the way around down the long, dark hallway. And it was long, lined with 3 sets of closets and ending with a small closet for the hot water heater. It felt like the stuff of childhood nightmares. I remember as kids, my sister and I would lie in that back room, clutching each other under the blankets, listening to footsteps coming down the hall, footsteps that always vanished when we dared to peek. Our grandmother said it was just our imagination, but my sister and I were convinced there was something more. So there I was now in my late 20s, still feeling that familiar fear. But this time, I was allowed to open the pocket door. My daughter's crib was just beyond it. One night, as I folded laundry, my husband stepped outside for a smoke. I finished a couple of baby outfits and walked through the pocket door into the living room. The dim light filtering through the sheer curtains helped me navigate around the coffee table and footrest without stumbling. Then, in the faint light, I saw him, my grandfather, sitting in the armchair, just barely visible in the shadows. I started to turn, thinking I'd ask him what he was doing up so late, but when I looked back, he was gone. I felt a chill run through me and, in an instant, darted out the front door to join my husband on the porch, my heart pounding. I tried to steady myself, knowing my husband was usually skeptical of my ghost stories. He took a drag of his cigarette, not even asking why I'd burst out the door, but after a moment he spoke. "You saw it too, didn't you?" he said, exhaling smoke into the night air. I swallowed, not sure how to respond. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me and said, "In the armchair, there in the dark. You saw him too. Looked just like your grandfather. But when you went to talk to him, he wasn't there." I nodded, relieved and unnerved. My husband wasn't one to admit to seeing a ghost, and knowing he'd seen the same thing made my stomach tighten. We waited a while before finally heading back inside, turning on as many lights as we could. The next morning, we decided to tell my grandmother what had happened. My actual grandfather overheard and laughed, saying, "I went to bed at 8. There's no way it was me." My grandmother scoffed, chalking it up to our imaginations. But I knew better. She's always been a skeptic, refusing to believe anything unusual was going on. That afternoon, I showed my husband some old family photos, pointing out various relatives. When he saw one, he froze and said, "That's him. That's the man I saw in the chair." I looked down at the photo he'd chosen. It wasn't my grandfather. It was my great-grandfather, the same person I'd thought I'd seen. My great-grandfather had a reputation in the family. He was mean-spirited, always making ghost sounds to scare us as we walked down the hallway or out the front door in the dark. He thought it was funny, but his pranks left a shadow that lingered in the house. And now it seemed he was still hanging around, still watching from the shadows. I first learned about my empathic abilities with a paranormal group I joined. I'd always been sensitive to people's emotions, but at a paranormal conference at the Queen Mary, it became clearer. A friend introduced me to a well-known demonologist. His name escapes me now. When we shook hands, a warm current, like electricity, ran through me. He chuckled and said, "Well, hello there, little empath." I'd never heard the term before, and later looked it up. It made sense. I realized my empathy made me attractive to spirits. I'd experienced strange encounters throughout my life, but now I understood why they seemed drawn to me. When my husband and I moved into our new home with our 2 children, I was wary. The previous tenant, an older man, had passed away in the house, likely from cancer. His son had renovated the place, putting in new carpet, tile, and fixtures. The house looked beautiful, but there were signs of its past life. My son's room had 2 doors, one leading to the hallway, the other to the foyer and front room, creating a loop that the kids loved to race around. I tried keeping the doors closed, but they wouldn't stay that way. At first, I blamed our 4-year-old son for the constantly open doors, but then other things started happening. My son would wake in the middle of the night, crying, saying someone had disturbed him. His favorite toys broke mysteriously, and he'd insist that someone had broken them. My daughter began to complain about an old man standing in her doorway, watching her at night. Talking to the owner, I learned that the man had died in my son's room. Our bedroom had been his wife's sewing room, and my daughter's room had been his project room. Toward the end of his life, he'd become mean-spirited and irritable, yelling at neighborhood kids, banging his cane on the fence, and even throwing rocks. He was the kind of figure that lingered, refusing to let go. I'd catch a tall shadow moving around the house out of the corner of my eye, enough to make me feel watched, uncomfortable, like he didn't want us there. Eventually, my kids started sleeping at the foot of our bed, as if instinctively drawn to safety. A Christian friend of mine, a deacon at our church, offered to help with a blessing. She brought holy water and pieces of cloth soaked in it, planning to place them in each room to drive away the old man's spirit. My cousin was there to support me, and we'd sent the kids to stay with relatives for the night. We started in the garage, moving through the kitchen, the living room, my son's room, and my daughter's room, saving my bedroom for last. As we went from room to room, praying and sprinkling holy water, the air grew heavier, almost suffocating. My ears felt as if they needed to pop, like we were climbing to a high altitude. My friend and cousin mentioned feeling the same mounting pressure and unease. In each room, we asked the old man to move on, leaving bits of blessed cloth in discreet places. Finally, we reached my bedroom. We paused in the doorway, saying a prayer for protection before entering. Like we had at every doorway, I reached up to mark a cross with holy water above the entrance. The moment my hand went up, two icy hands seemed to shoot out from nowhere, shoving me hard in the chest. I stumbled back, but my cousin caught me, steadying me. My friend grabbed my arm, helping me push my hand back up to complete the sign of the cross. And then, everything changed. The air in the house lifted, like it took a deep breath. Our ears popped, and there was a soft boom as all the tension dissipated. Silence settled over us, peaceful and clear. After that night, the old man's spirit was gone. We never saw or heard from him again. In my experience as a paranormal investigator, I've learned that people's perceptions of hauntings vary wildly. Often, there are signs pointing to an overactive imagination, medication side effects, or even a subconscious desire to be haunted. People who watch a lot of ghost shows, collect books on the paranormal, or, my personal favorite, dabble with an Ouija board often set themselves up for spooky encounters. I've also noticed that pack rats or hoarders tend to report paranormal activity more frequently, though I can't quite explain the connection. So, when our team arrived for a preliminary investigation at a family's apartment, we were ready to look for contributing factors before jumping to any conclusions. The family had reported shadows in the front room and a growling noise coming from the child's closet. As we sat down to chat with the family, I couldn't help but notice how the blinds threw shadows on the wall when someone walked by outside. With the vertical blinds shifting in the opposite direction of the passerby, it could easily look like shadows moving on their own if someone glanced quickly. That solved one mystery, and at this point, I doubted we'd find anything genuinely paranormal. After a while, our lead investigator and another teammate stayed in the living room while another investigator and I went down the hallway to take readings. I called out numbers as I checked each room, and she noted them on her clipboard. Everything seemed routine until we walked past the son's bedroom. Out of nowhere, I heard a low, rumbling growl. My heart shot into my throat. I wanted to scream and scramble onto my teammates' shoulders like a cartoon character running from a ghost. But, trying to hold onto my dignity as a professional ghost hunter, I froze, my hand digging into her shoulder like a steel claw. Thankfully, she'd heard it too. We both stood there, motionless, like startled deer. Steeling myself, I stepped into the room. We both sat on the bed facing the cluttered closet stuffed with toys, mentally preparing for something to jump out. I tried to brush off my unease, thinking, if I were those poor toys, I'd growl too. We poked around the closet, hoping to find a misplaced toy making noise, but nothing seemed out of place. Then, just as I backed away from the bed, it happened again. A low, distinct growl. This time I could pinpoint the sound. My eyes snapped to the window next to the closet. The source of the growl wasn't from inside the room at all. Outside, there was a trash enclosure made of cinder blocks with a grated door in front. A large steel trash bin sat just outside the enclosure, creating an echo chamber. When a souped-up car drove by, its engine rumbled and reverberated, bouncing off the enclosure and into the room, making it sound like the growl was coming from the closet. As we sat there, we heard it 3 more times, perfectly in sync with passing cars. If I'd given in to my first instinct, to scream and run out the door, I might have missed the real cause of the paranormal growl. Thankfully, I held it together and looked deeper. Turns out, in ghost hunting, Sometimes logic trumps the urge to pull your skirt over your head and dash for safety. I'm a 32-year-old woman who just moved back temporarily with my parents, bringing along my little Chewini, Chloe. Growing up in this house, I often felt unnerved at night, but I chalked it up to childhood fears and my mom saying it was just me being afraid of the dark. As I grew older, though, the strange occurrences became harder to ignore. When I was 14, I remember waking up terrified, convinced spirits were in my room, trying to attack me. The fear was so overwhelming that I curled up in a ball and cried, unable to sleep. At 16, I had to call the police because I was receiving silent prank calls, which, strangely, seemed to be coming from inside the house. Looking back, it sounds like something out of a horror movie, but it was real. When I was in 3rd grade, I often woke up in that foggy state between sleep and wakefulness and saw a little girl standing in the doorway. She told me her name was Rachel, and she'd gesture for me to follow her. I'd see her in the mornings, a silent figure in my doorway, and while it scared me at first, she eventually became familiar. Years later, I moved into a small house in Pasadena, California, not far from my parents. The house belonged to my friend's parents, who lived in Washington. They'd mentioned some strange occurrences in the house after I'd moved in. Her brother, for example, would clean the kitchen, leave for a moment, and come back to find all the cupboards and drawers open. On several occasions, friends who stayed overnight would see an elderly woman in an old rocking chair in the lanai room, quietly singing a patriotic song. Curious, we decided to bring out an old Ouija board. We asked who and how many inhabited the house, and the planchette quickly moved from 4 to 83. We didn't know what we were doing, unknowingly opening a doorway to something beyond us. Intrigued, we started reading up on Wicca, and I found I had a natural inclination for it. I could wish for things to happen, and often they did. As my friends and I got deeper into our exploration, one of my roommates began experiencing terrifying episodes in her bedroom, describing seeing a dark cloud above her bed and feeling intense pressure on her chest. It was clear that something was taking advantage of our naivety. A particularly eerie incident happened around 2 a.m. one night. A friend had come over unannounced, entering through the kitchen. When my roommate and I returned home, we found the living room filled with thick, black smoke, though no one had been there to start a fire. That's when I decided to research what we might have encountered, and I came across characteristics that matched the entity haunting her room. It seemed like we were in over our heads. One of the most horrifying encounters came when I woke to see what I thought was my roommate, Christy, standing by my dresser, watching me sleep. "Christy, what are you doing?" I asked. She answered, "I have a sister," which was odd since Christy only had a brother. As she slowly moved toward my bed, I asked, "Christy, what are you talking about?" Her voice darkened as she replied, "I'm not Christy." Fear gripped me as I realized this wasn't my roommate. Her voice grew more menacing as she accused, "You watch us, you see us." Years prior, I had speculated that the house's spirit might be a young girl with a tragic history, but after this encounter, I dropped any investigation and soon decided it was best to move out. Later, I moved to San Jose, and at first, I was relieved to be free of the constant sense of dread. But over time, I noticed I was waking up at 3 a.m. almost every night, a time I later learned some believe is a mocking inversion of 3 p.m., the traditional time of Christ's death, when demons are thought to be most active. I started needing a light on at night and even soft music to help drown out the whispers and subtle sounds in the darkness. In the silence, a paralyzing fear would grip me, the kind I had tried to escape from my childhood. One summer night, my roommate confided in me that she'd had trouble sleeping and woke up to a terrifying vision. 2 fiery red eyes staring at her. She said the figure spoke to her in Spanish, warning her to maintain order and cleanliness. She took it as a sign, especially being Catholic, that disarray invites darkness. Our other roommate, Eric, overheard us talking and admitted that he often woke at 3 a.m. to the smell of smoke. We all prayed together that day, and things calmed down somewhat. Months later, I woke in the middle of the night to find my light bulb had burned out. As I lay there trying to calm myself, Chloe, my dog, began barking at something in the air. I saw a shadow near the closet, just above my bed. I tried to move but was paralyzed with fear, unable to scream. Somehow, I managed to flee to my roommate's room, where we all huddled together and prayed. They eventually found me a new bulb, and I was able to sleep. But these experiences paled in comparison to returning to my parents' home. The house sits on what was once part of the old Gainsborough estate. Our plot was where the estate's caretaker and horses had been kept, and the original stone wall out front is over a century old, with ancient trees towering above. The energy around this place feels dense and unsettling, especially near the old orchard. 10 years ago, I buried a pet rabbit in the backyard. Shortly afterward, I woke to see smoke and a faint light in my room. I saw an old Spanish man dressed in worn clothes, holding my rabbit as if he were showing it to me. He didn't speak, but I sensed him communicating with me, letting me know they'd take care of the rabbit. I wasn't afraid, but when I told my mom, she dismissed it. I've always felt something darker here, something that feels like it's been hunting me for years. I'm fine in the dark anywhere else, but here, the fear of being outside at night is overwhelming. A friend once helped me explore the orchard area, and when he returned, he said he felt it too. He believed it was the spirit of a young boy, one who'd been playing with my fear and growing stronger because of it. He told me to strengthen my faith, but that advice has only added to my unease. I pray every day, but I'm haunted by the question, what does this entity want? And if I'm meant to help it, how can I? As if to confirm my suspicions, Chloe often stares into empty corners at night, her fur bristling, barking at things I can't see. Whatever lives in this house, it feels as if it's been with me for most of my life, lingering in the shadows, feeding off the fear that has kept me captive. The first time I remember seeing it was in my old home in California, near San Francisco. We lived in a small apartment surrounding a shared courtyard. I stayed with my mother and was often home alone while she worked. One summer day, while watching television in the kitchen, I heard a deep moan echo through the apartment. I thought it was our cat, Ally, pushing a door open since she wasn't very social and the apartment was old, often making odd noises. But then I heard it again, and this time I realized how unnatural it sounded. Though I was used to being alone and hearing odd noises, this felt different, so I decided to check it out. Exiting the kitchen into the living room, the layout led me from one room to the next, each connected like a series, bathroom at the back, kitchen at the entrance. The moaning sound grew louder as I reached the bedroom, where I froze. For the first time, I saw it. Immense and towering by the bunk bed. It was an eerie, human-like shape, tall, with thin arms and legs that ended in hands and feet larger than normal. It had no head, just a strange mound atop its shoulders, and its entire form was pitch black, with no color or texture to break the darkness. My heart was racing, and I could barely move, but I managed to escape, running to a neighbor's apartment upstairs. I tried to explain, but he reassured me it was likely pareidolia, the mind's way of making sense of shadows. Still shaken, I eventually returned home, hoping it was a one-time thing. Months went by, and I almost forgot about the figure. But one night, while my mom was home, I saw it again. This time, it was outside on the porch, peering through the window as far back as it could stand. I screamed and bolted into the bedroom, where I told my mom about the figure, reminding her of the earlier incident. She didn't make much of it. All of my sightings have been at night or dusk, adding to the unease. A year and a half later, after we'd moved to the East Bay, I stayed with my grandmother nearly 5,000 miles away for a weekend. One night, as I lay in bed, I rolled over, and there it was again, right next to me. This time, it was moving strangely, almost like it was marching, though my memory of this moment is a bit blurred. Terrified, I screamed, leapt out of bed, and scrambled to my grandfather's work desk. My grandmother calmly dismissed it as a night terror, assuming I had been half asleep. Although shaken, I managed to sleep in the same room that night, though I've never forgotten that encounter. The next experience occurred much later, after I took a summer job as a lifeguard at the local community pool. One Friday night, after a city night swim event, I stayed late to help with cleanup. The pool area bordered a hill with a fence, lined with pine trees, and I was assigned to patrol it to ensure no trash or people were left on the other side. As I walked over the hill, I thought I saw the figure again, just past the trees. I took a second look, thinking it was just a tree trunk, but as I got closer, the figure emerged by the fence, seemingly staring at me. Heart pounding, I rushed back to the pool deck and stayed silent, not wanting to appear paranoid. Another memorable encounter happened on Angel Island during an overnight trip with my friend and his father, who loved to sail. The island has a World War II hospital in disrepair, open for visitors to explore, though the upper floors are inaccessible. While we wandered around with flashlights, I was on edge but pushed through my fear, even as we passed through the hospital. Then I saw it again, standing outside a window in the next room. I shrieked and pointed, and my friend, who had his phone camera ready, aimed it at the spot. He saw a faint shadow but captured nothing on the camera. The figure slipped behind the window, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps on the upper floor. We both knew we had seen something, though his father and brother shrugged it off as our imagination. Most recently, about a month ago, I saw it in my East Bay home for the first time. I was doing homework in my room around 6 p.m. with loud music playing. When I turned to grab my remote, I saw it standing in the corner, its figure blending with the shadows. Without thinking, I threw my remote at it, but it vanished instantly, as if it had never been there. It didn't fade or disperse. It simply disappeared, like a light switched off. Though shaken, I didn't dare approach that corner again. These are the most vivid incidents, but I've seen it on other occasions. Sometimes it's in my house, around a corner, or even outside in the backyard. Once, I saw it running silently in a friend's backyard while we were at dinner. Unlike other shadow creature experiences I've heard about, this entity doesn't seem to bring any premonitions or warnings. I never feel its presence or sense anything unusual, only pure fear when I actually see it. Despite having seen it many times, the terror is always the same. I can't tell if it means harm. It never speaks or moves toward me. Its only interaction is visual, and yet, it leaves me scared for my life every time. There's something profoundly unnatural about it. Its height, the unsettling thinness of its limbs, and its lack of a defined head make it unlike anything I've ever known. I don't believe in any particular religion or even concepts like demons or angels, but I can't deny there is something out there beyond our understanding that seems to be following me. 5 years ago, when I was 8, my family and I lived in an apartment in California, near San Francisco. Let's call it the Satakoy apartment. It was the only unit in the building with a bar, which my dad loved, but from the moment we moved in, I had an odd feeling about the place. I chalked it up to being young and adjusting to a new home. There were times when I'd be alone and would refuse to leave my room. The kitchen, especially, gave me chills and I never wanted to go near it. Even stranger, the shower in my parents' bathroom always attracted little mosquitoes, no matter how much we cleaned. One day in science class, I learned mosquitoes are attracted to dead or decaying things, which got me suspicious, but I brushed it off. Another day, we found a huge black stray dog and brought it in before taking it to the shelter. While everyone was distracted with the dog, I went to shower, and the bathroom light flickered off, then back on. I screamed, and my dad came rushing in, visibly shaken. A year later, my little brother's new sandals vanished, and we never found them. This really unsettled my mom, though I didn't know why at the time. After 2 years in the Satakoy apartment, my dad decided it was time to move. We ended up in a new place, which we'll call the Woodman apartment. Once we moved, my parents and older brother shared the real reason for our move. My brother told me that in the Satakoy apartment, he saw a red figure of a boy cross the kitchen every day. My mom admitted that she'd always felt strange about the kitchen too. My dad revealed that one night, as he was coming home carrying my little sister, he felt a force push him so hard it nearly sent him down the stairs. This was my initiation into believing in the paranormal, and since then, I'd often tell friends about the haunted Satakoy apartment. At the Woodman apartment, I sometimes wondered if the little boy had followed us. One summer, I invited some friends over. First, Kelly and Emils came, and while we were eating in my parents' room, a doll somewhere in the room started making a crying noise. Terrified, we tried to unlock the door to get out, but in our panic, it took longer than usual. My parents looked at us like we were crazy. When we opened the closet where the sound seemed to come from, there was no doll. We decided to move to my room. Another day, my friend Tanya came over. The moment she entered, she said she felt a dark presence. I thought she was joking, trying to scare me since I'd already shared my Sadakoi apartment stories. A few days later, Emils and Jack came over. While we were watching TV in the living room, we heard a loud thud. Already spooked, we bolted outside, staying there until we saw a light turn on by itself in the empty house. Then, we noticed a dark figure by the window that appeared to be hanging itself. Terrified, we ran to my aunt's house across the street and told my cousin, who didn't believe us. There were many other strange events with my friends Kelly, Emils, Anaya, Luis, Jenny, Eric, and Jack. So many, in fact, that some of them are now too scared to come over, while others are curious enough to visit for a ghostly adventure. One night after showering, I saw a dark figure with glowing red eyes in the mirror. It vanished when I blinked. I quickly texted Kelly, who assured me I wasn't crazy, telling me to be careful. One morning, my brother told me about a strange event involving my 3-year-old sister. He'd heard her crying in the night, and when he checked her crib, it was empty. But when he returned to his bed, she was there, lying next to him. He was shocked. How could she have climbed out without him hearing? Since then, my brother and I have both taken an interest in the paranormal. We've watched Paranormal Activity and similar movies, but oddly, I don't get scared easily. My brother, who's 19 now, has to sleep with my parents. I think his experiences are more intense, so he believes it all deeply. Just recently, my brother shared more strange events he's experienced. He usually sleeps in the living room, feeling more comfortable on the couch. One night around 3 a.m., he went to the kitchen for water. He switched on the light, which flickered off and then back on. After drinking, he saw a dark figure about our mom's height standing near the dining table. Thinking it was her, he was about to ask her to get him a blanket, but found it strange she wasn't moving. As he got closer, the figure retreated, fading as he moved toward it. The following morning, he heard footsteps in our little brother's playroom. When he turned on the light, no one was there. Yesterday, he woke up because he felt a strange tugging on his chest. But when he tried to move, he found he couldn't. It felt like something was holding him down, controlling his body, and he couldn't even scream. I'm left wondering, is this a spirit or something else? My brother thinks it's a demon, but I feel it might be the boy from the Sadakoi apartment somehow following us. Around Christmas one year, I was at my great-grandmother's house. Early one morning, I looked out into the hallway and saw a huge gray-white mist hovering in the doorway. Terrified, I called out for my mom and dad. They came to comfort me, and at the time, I didn't think much of it. It wasn't until about 10 years later that I brought it up to my mom again. That's when she told me that both she and my aunt had seen the same mist in the exact same place when they were only a few years older than I was. Her confession confirmed my belief in the supernatural. My mom told me that spirits had been drawn to me even earlier than that, noting that in different houses there were unexplained smells in my room. A lady's perfume near my crib once, and in another home, the scent of chocolate cake. Experiencing things like this sparked my curiosity about the paranormal, and over time, I started exploring haunted locations. One place I visited with my girlfriend was a historic hotel in San Francisco, where we joined a ghost walk led by a man named Jim Fossbinder. The tour was fascinating, and afterward, we decided to stay a night in the hotel's famously haunted Mary Lake suite. The hotel used to be a girls' school in the early 1900s, and the suite had once been the office of the school's headmistress, Mary Lake. According to stories, Mary Lake was a caring woman, and her spirit was said to be kind, often tucking in guests or even unpacking their clothes. After checking into the suite, we let Jim and the tour group know they were welcome to check it out. The night passed without incident, aside from faint sounds of laughing around 3 to 4 a.m., though that could have been other guests. Still, we couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was around, but it wasn't a threatening presence, just a lingering, watchful one. Things got stranger the next morning. My girlfriend and I went out for breakfast. She wasn't a fan of the hotel's small, old-fashioned elevator and preferred to take the stairs. When we returned, I spotted a woman around 5 feet tall entering the elevator, so I didn't even bother to ask if she wanted to take it. But my girlfriend hadn't seen the woman and suggested we use it this time. I agreed, and when I pressed the button, the elevator doors opened immediately, already on the ground floor. Stunned, I stayed silent until we were back in the room. There was no one in the lobby, and the elevator shouldn't have been there if someone else had just used it. We were still marveling over this when the next event happened. While my girlfriend was finishing her hair in the bathroom, I took my camera outside to see if I could capture any orbs or apparitions. After snapping a few photos, I returned to the room to pack up. Just as I was putting my camera away, the hotel room door suddenly opened and then slammed shut. I hadn't seen it, but my girlfriend had a full view of it happening. We tried everything to debunk it, testing the door multiple times. No matter how we positioned it, the door's automatic hinge would always close it, making it impossible for it to swing open on its own. After nearly half an hour of failed attempts to explain it, we decided it was time to check out. With our arms full of bags, we walked out and let the door swing shut on its own. This time, though, the door didn't close completely. It got caught on the latch. We stared at each other, thinking Mary Lake might have held the door for us, urging us not to leave something behind. When we went back in, we found my girlfriend's favorite blanket on the bed. We both thanked Mary out loud, grateful for her kindness and the unforgettable experience she'd given us. The shadow at my bedside. It all began when I was 5. I remember one particular night when I was more tired than ever. Even though I'd been practically lazy for weeks, I'd been feeling down, constantly exhausted, and it was hard to wake up early anymore. My memory was foggy, and everywhere I went, I felt this heavy sense of paranoia. My mom thought it could be some mental health issue, but I wasn't convinced. That night, as I lay in bed, I just thought and thought and thought, until suddenly, my eyes snapped open. I felt an overwhelming wave of fear mixed with an eerie awareness, and as my eyes adjusted, I realized I wasn't alone. Right beside my bed stood something darker than the shadows. A pitch-black figure, just staring down at me. Terrified, I flipped over, curling into a ball and pulling the blanket over my head, my heart racing like it never had before. And then, I felt it. Something was pulling at me from my back. It was like my soul was being dragged out, as though I was drifting away from my own body. Just when I thought I couldn't bear it anymore, I heard a soft pop in my ear, and suddenly everything stopped. I lay there, trembling, wondering if it had been a dream, but I knew it was real. I could move, turn, pull the blanket over me. That wasn't sleep paralysis. I spent the next morning researching shadow beings and sleep paralysis, but none of it explained what I had felt. To the demon of my house. It was about a week later, around 8 a.m., when I got back home after driving my friend, C, to work. I crawled into bed, ready to get some sleep, but sleep wasn't coming easily. Instead, I watched swirling colors behind my eyelids, which was a little unusual but nothing strange, until I felt pressure on my chest, as if I was being pushed down, deeper and deeper into my mattress. Along with it came a strange sound, like garbled voices blending into one eerie noise. Panic set in, and I screamed in my mind, "Go away!" Instantly, the pressure lifted. Shaken, I turned over, remembering something I'd read about sleep paralysis often happening while lying on your back. Just as I was drifting off again, I felt it return. This time, I asked in my head, "Lord Darkness." The pressure grew even stronger. I was desperate now and demanded it to leave, and it finally did. When I told my friends about it, one thought it was a demon, while another suggested it might be an angry energy. I wondered if I'd somehow brought it on myself, but I couldn't figure out what I might have done. 3. The push. A couple of weeks went by without any disturbances, and I thought maybe it was over. One night, I took some painkillers prescribed after dental surgery and went to bed, hoping for a good night's sleep. I was almost asleep when I felt a hard push against my chest, jolting my entire body. Startled, I took off my sleep mask and looked around. Nothing seemed unusual, so I brushed it off as a hypnic jerk and settled back in. But a few hours later, I woke up again, my leg suspended in midair before it landed back on my bed's metal frame with a loud thud. Confused and frightened, I wondered how my leg had gotten up there in the first place. Trying to calm down, I got some water and lay back down, only to feel another push. This time, something pressed against my hip, rolling me onto my stomach. Wide awake now, I lay there until morning, too scared to move. 4. The open door. I'd been in a strange headspace lately, having déjà vu almost daily, with dreams so vivid that they felt like real life. One night, I wore my sleep mask as usual and tried to block out everything around me. Soon, I felt the urge to open my eyes, and when I did, I saw that my door was open. This was strange. I never left it open before bed. Then, I felt it again, that wave of fear washing over me. Instinctively, I turned over in panic, and then I heard it, a spiraling, whooshing sound that felt almost like some otherworldly music. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. In my head, I was begging, "Help me, please, someone," until suddenly, I was awake, heart racing, breathless. I lay there, gripping the blanket, not sure if I'd been dreaming or if something real had just happened, but I could feel that dread lingering, almost as if whatever it was had really been there with me. It was close to midnight, maybe 1 a.m., when we started getting tired. That's when Rennie began sharing something she'd never told anyone before. Secrets about her house. She confessed that, for as long as she'd lived there, she'd felt uneasy. It didn't matter if it was day or night, or if her family was home. There was always a strange, unsettling feeling hanging over the place. Rennie suspected her house might be haunted, possibly by someone who had passed away long ago. She'd lived there for about 4 or 5 years, and during that time, she'd heard plenty of strange noises, especially at night. The sounds ranged from scratching on the walls and objects moving on their own to the unmistakable sound of footsteps. But one sound disturbed her more than any other. A voice, soft and faint, like a little girl singing. Carla and I laughed it off at first, teasing her about making it up, though we half believed her. Rennie wasn't the type to lie or joke about these things, so her words carried a weight we couldn't quite dismiss. After some nervous laughter, we all eventually drifted off around 1:30 a.m. An hour later, I was jolted awake by an eerie sound coming from downstairs. Since we were sleeping near the railing, I could hear it coming from the bottom of the staircase. It was quiet but distinct, footsteps shuffling and faint, whispering voices, as though someone was lurking just out of sight. Cold sweat trickled down my palms as I hid under my blanket, hoping that if I ignored it, it would go away. But the sound only grew louder. Finally, I nudged Carla awake and whispered if she could hear the footsteps too, or if I was just losing it. She strained to listen, and her expression froze. We exchanged terrified glances as the noise continued, confirming that we were both hearing the same thing. In a panic, we woke up Rennie to tell her, but instead of fear, she just nodded. These were the same sounds she'd been hearing for years. She seemed almost resigned, but Carla and I were horrified. We all sat up, listening, and then everything fell completely silent. We stared at the staircase, but the bottom was shrouded in darkness, nothing but pitch black. Then, after a few minutes, we heard it, the voice of a little girl singing. We couldn't make out the words, but she seemed to be singing fragments of a song, like someone who only remembers bits and pieces. Frozen in place, we could do nothing but stare at each other, wide-eyed, jaws dropped. I felt a wave of terror rise within me. I was so scared I thought I might cry. The singing finally stopped, and silence fell over the house once more. We spent the rest of the night huddled together on the same couch, as far from the staircase as possible so we wouldn't have to look into the dark below. When morning came, Rennie decided she couldn't stay there any longer. She moved in with one of us while she searched for a new place to live. We never found out if anyone else ever moved into that house after her. For all we know, it could be abandoned now, haunted by that same unsettling presence. Even now, remembering that night gives me chills. The sound of that little girl's song is etched in my mind, forever haunting me with its eerie, fragmented melody. It was a regular night at my friend Mackenzie's house. Lisa was there too, and we were just hanging out, doing all the things typical friends do. We decided to put on a movie, Shark Night of all things. After watching Soul Surfer recently, I was already spooked by shark attack scenes, so I wasn't exactly thrilled about this choice. To delay the inevitable, I found myself stalling, finding any excuse to get up and go to the bathroom or the kitchen. The first time I went to the bathroom, nothing unusual happened. But on my second trip, I was just aimlessly passing the time, even starting to paint my nails. I just reached my middle finger when suddenly, the nail polish bottle disappeared. I hadn't heard it drop, and both the bathroom doors were shut and locked. Confused, I looked around, scanning the floor and the countertop. Just then, the shower curtain jerked in my direction, as if someone was poking it from behind. I jumped, startled, and when I looked down again, the nail polish bottle was back. Heart racing, I quickly screwed the cap back on and bolted out of the bathroom. When I returned to the living room, Lisa looked at me and asked if I'd been crying. I wasn't, but my nerves were clearly frayed. We continued watching the movie, and I tried to distract myself by chatting with my boyfriend on my laptop. Eventually, I got thirsty and went to the kitchen for some Dr. Pepper. As I reached for a glass, I felt someone come up behind me. It was an intense, uncomfortable feeling, like someone unfriendly was standing right there. I figured it was Mackenzie trying to sneak up on me, so I casually called out, "Don't sneak up on me like that." But there was no answer. A sudden chill spread across the room, and I could feel an icy presence in front of me. Panic set in, and I dashed toward the dining room, sensing the presence closing in behind me. I was just steps from the living room when, bam, something shoved me hard in the back, and I stumbled forward. It wasn't just a push. I felt something entering me, invading me, pressing itself through my back. I screamed out in terror and pain, but it wasn't over. The pressure intensified as if it were trying to fully take over. I managed to get to my feet, but the force hit me again, knocking me back down. It pushed and pushed, filling me with an overwhelming, suffocating darkness. And then, I blacked out. The next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of Lisa's voice and Mackenzie lightly slapping my face. I was crying, but I didn't know why. A strange, unshakable guilt washed over me, though I had no idea what I could be guilty of. I wondered if it had all been a dream, some vivid, horrible nightmare. My question was answered when Mackenzie asked why I'd been talking to myself in the kitchen and then started screaming and collapsing to the floor. Lisa said, "You were unconscious for 5 minutes." It sounded impossible, but the fear in their eyes told me it was true. When I checked my laptop, I saw my boyfriend had been messaging me repeatedly, worried after I'd gone silent. I told him everything, as unbelievable as it sounded. Since then, I've had trouble breathing, like invisible hands are wrapped around my throat. Sometimes I feel eyes on me, and other times I'm caught in a strange, hypnotized state. Today at school, things took an even darker turn. While talking to my best friend, I felt an urge. Something in my mind whispered, "Kill her. Do it. Use whatever you can find." It was like a loop, an unrelenting chant. Then, a faint, cold voice joined in, whispering, "You murderer, you killer, how could you?" One of my friends, Josh, mentioned the man, an entity I vaguely remembered from childhood. I thought he'd disappeared when I was about 4, but now I'm questioning if he's back. And the girl in white, the one who called me a murderer, is she real too? Is she here? I'm terrified, confused, and I feel like I'm being followed. Part of me wants to believe none of this is real, that I'm imagining it. But deep down, I know it was real. It all happened, and I'm not sure what to do. My first experience with the paranormal happened when I was just 3 years old. It was right after lunch, during nap time. I was lying in bed when I heard a noise coming from my closet. At that age, I wasn't scared of anything. But when I opened the closet door, fear found me. A tall, young man shot out of the closet, rushing right through me, sending a wave of cold air blasting through my small body. I screamed, but before I could react, something pushed me into the closet, and the door slammed shut behind me. I pounded and cried, terrified, until my mom burst in, asking why I was out of bed. I was too scared to say a word. Ever since that day, I can't remember a time when the paranormal wasn't a part of my life. When I was 4, my parents were going through a rough patch and decided to split up temporarily, though they didn't want me exposed to the turmoil. They gave me the choice of who to live with, and I chose my mom, to whom I was closer. So we moved from Georgia to California while my dad relocated to North Carolina. In our new house, things were peaceful at first. My mom says I was the happiest 4-year-old, but a month later, everything changed. I began to fear entering any room except the bathroom. I told my mom I had an imaginary friend there, a little girl named Zoe, who I referred to as the girl in the pink jammies. One night, when I was about 5, I was lying in bed with my mom. The door to the master bathroom creaked open, and a light flickered on. I thought it was my mom, but when I rolled over, she was still fast asleep beside me. Hesitantly, I called out, "Zoe?" And the light flickered again, almost like an invitation. I got up, tiptoed over, and sat on the bathroom floor, where Zoe appeared. She looked worried, and then she spoke. She told me she was 7 years old and that her father had been mean to her. He used to hit her and touch her in ways that she didn't like. I remember asking her why he would do that, and she replied in a soft, tearful voice, either saying, "Because my mommy isn't here," or maybe, "Because my mommy told him to." Her eyes filled with sadness, and she told me her father had gone away, but now that we'd moved in, he was coming back. Then my mom came in and sent me back to bed, and that encounter was over, but Zoe's presence never left. A few weeks later, I started sleeping in my own room. I don't even know why I was scared of the other rooms before, but suddenly, I wasn't. One night, I was lying in bed when I felt the covers lift. I whispered, "Mommy?" but got no answer. I rolled over, hopeful, and whispered, "Zoe," but it wasn't Zoe. A chilling coldness spread across my belly, and I heard a faint cry, "Daddy, stop it." Then I saw her, Zoe, with her gray eyes, blonde hair, and pink pajamas with darker stripes, standing beside my bed. She reached out, putting her hand over my eyes, and I felt a strange calm wash over me as I drifted into sleep, even though I could somehow still see her hand there, comforting me. As I grew older, Zoe stopped talking to me, though she continued to make her presence known. When I was about 8, frustration got the best of me. I sat on my bed, yelling, "Zoe, why did you stop talking to me? Show yourself. I want an explanation. I want to know what really happened." The first silence answered me. But then, one by one, things began flying across the room. Books flew off the dresser, clothes tumbled from the closet, and my favorite stuffed animal was hurled out of the door, down the hallway, and clear across the stairs. Panicked, I screamed, "Stop it! Owie, stop it!" And just like that, everything fell silent. For a long moment, there was only quiet. Then I heard her voice, faint but clear, taunting, "Come and get me if you can, Granny." To this day, I don't know why she called me Granny. Maybe it was because I was older than her and she was jealous, or maybe it was something else entirely. I haven't seen Zoe since I was 9, after my mom and I moved to a new neighborhood with my stepdad, following her final divorce from my dad. But even now, I sometimes wonder if Zoe's still out there somewhere, waiting, holding on to her secrets. This story takes place when I was 9 years old. My mom had recently remarried a man named Nick, and the three of us moved into a new house together. I didn't get along with Nick very well, and I started acting out, desperate for my mom's attention, especially since she seemed to spend all her time with him. I spent most of my days in the basement where I had a playroom, and that's where I'd usually hang out with friends. I hadn't had any paranormal experiences in years, so I'd convinced myself those strange encounters were in the past. But one day, my friend Cassidy came over, and everything changed. We were in the basement, making noise on purpose, hoping to get my mom to come down. Suddenly, Cassidy froze, her eyes wide with fear. I laughed and asked, "Is she coming?" Since Cassidy had better hearing than I did. But Cassidy didn't respond. Instead, She backed away from the stairs, starting to cry. Alarmed, I grabbed her shoulders and asked, "Cassidy, what's wrong?" Through tears, she said, "There's a man in the house." I told her the only man in the house was my stepdad, and he was at work. She just shook her head, crying harder, and begged not to go back upstairs or make any noise. That night, I was jolted awake by screaming coming from the kitchen. I rushed downstairs and found Cassidy standing by the open fridge, her gaze fixed on something in the living room. I followed her stare and saw it too. A dark figure of a man, running down the hallway toward the guest bedrooms. Before I could react, Cassidy collapsed to the floor, screaming and crying uncontrollably. She was holding a glass of milk that shattered, spilling everywhere. I tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't stop. When I asked why she'd gotten up without me, Cassidy looked confused, saying she didn't even remember leaving bed. Her parents didn't let her come back over after that, and for a long time, none of my friends were allowed to visit. Things stayed quiet until my 10th birthday, when my mom let me have a slumber party. Boys and girls came over, but only the girls stayed the night. Cassidy couldn't make it since she was sick, but my other friends came, and we spent the evening in the basement watching The Nightmare Before Christmas. Sometime during the movie, my friend Taylor needed to use the bathroom, so I went with her, telling the others to keep watching. We reached the bathroom, and as I waited outside, I heard the sound of water running. I laughed and told Taylor that this was not the time to take a shower. She opened the door, looking puzzled, and said she hadn't turned on the water. I glanced inside. The tub wasn't running, and the noise had stopped. But suddenly, a high-pitched, blood-curdling scream filled the bathroom, so close it sounded like it was right next to us. Terrified, we bolted back to the basement, too scared to sleep much that night. The following week, I was bouncing on my bed, throwing things around to get my mom's attention. I threw one of my fuzzy round pillows, only to have it thrown right back in my face. Startled, I picked it up and tossed it again. It sat still this time, but when I turned away, it suddenly smacked me in the back. I screamed, and my mom rushed in, already annoyed at the noise. She started scolding me, saying I was too old to act like this. Then something strange happened. She turned into a complete stranger. Her face twisted with anger, and before I knew it, she grabbed my shoulder and shoved me off the bed. I fell hard, hitting my head on the dresser before I crashed onto the wooden floor. Dizzy and on the verge of blacking out, I saw Nick run into the room, yelling at my mom. All I remember is my mom screaming, asking how I'd ended up on the floor, and then everything went dark. I want to believe my mom was possessed that day. She would never, ever do anything to hurt me, and the way she shoved me was completely out of character. Could it have been that dark figure possessing her? Or was it something else entirely? After that incident, I went to live with my dad. That was the last time I saw him, and one of the few times I saw my siblings. Even now, I wonder about that night, and whether it was the dark figure, somehow still lingering in our lives, that took hold of her in that moment. Growing up in Los Angeles, I always believed in ghosts. I watched shows like Supernatural, Ghost Hunters, and movies like Paranormal Activity religiously. But my fascination wasn't just from what I saw on TV. I had my own experiences. When I was very young, I had an imaginary friend named Rose. No one else could see her, and I thought she was just part of my imagination. But as I got older, I realized Rose wasn't just in my head. She disappeared for a while, so it seemed like she was an imaginary friend who had just faded away. I'd still see her sometimes, though, just outside my bedroom door or in my peripheral vision. She was always kind to me and my family. Nothing felt strange about her presence except that, well, no one else saw her. Years later, I looked up the history of our house and found that a woman named Rose had once lived there and had taken her own life in my bedroom. As I got older, I started bringing friends over. Sometimes, if Rose didn't like a friend, strange things would happen. One day, I invited a friend over, and suddenly, the lights began flickering, the TV volume shot up, and the power cut off entirely. Later, when we were upstairs in my room, the computer powered on with a blank document open, even though I hadn't touched it. It stayed on for a few seconds before shutting down again. As soon as my friend left, everything went back to normal. Our next-door neighbor also believed in spirits. After her sister passed away peacefully in her sleep, she became convinced that a devil was in her house. She'd scream and bang pots around, yelling to drive it out. Then one day, the noise just stopped. A few years later, I left for college, but when I came back for a weekend visit, things felt off. My dad wasn't home when I arrived, and I found the front room completely trashed. Shaken, I cleaned it up and figured maybe my dad or even my dog had caused the mess. But when my dad got home, he swore he wasn't responsible, and the mess was far too big for our dog. That weekend, I started seeing a tall, dark figure lingering by the front door, always just in my peripheral vision. It gave me a deep, unsettling fear, but it never did anything until I started bringing my best friend over. One day, she asked if my house was haunted. I told her about Rose, but she pressed further, asking if there was a darker presence in the house. When I said yes, she admitted that she'd seen it too. Together, we decided to investigate. We set my iPhone to record, left it on the table in the living room, and went to watch TV. After about 20 minutes, we stopped the recording and went back to check. Things on the table had moved, and the recording was eerie. No voices, no static, just creaking, footsteps, tapping, and shuffling sounds. My dad was asleep in his room, and my dog was in there with him, so there was no logical explanation. Around 3:30 a.m., we returned to the house after going to Hyperion Bridge, hoping for a classic ghostly experience. When we opened the front door, it felt like it had been yanked open from the inside. Despite the chilly 50-degree Los Angeles air, the house was colder than ever, the kind of dry cold that pricks your skin. Breathing felt thick and difficult. My friend and I glanced at each other, closed the door quickly, and made our way to the den, both of us completely unnerved. After that night, we did some research and discovered that what we were dealing with wasn't just a ghost. It was something darker, a demon. Scared, I reached out for help and had my room blessed. While it kept me safe, it also seemed to banish Rose, leaving the house unprotected. That's when things really took a turn. Wherever I went in the house, I felt its presence, feeding off my fear and my emotions. It shifted my moods, making me feel angry, depressed, or upset without warning. I became so terrified that, after sunset, I wouldn't leave my room. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd open my eyes and see it in the hallway, either standing or crouching, just outside my door. I knew it was there, but it couldn't enter my room. My dad didn't believe in ghosts, so we had to be careful when blessing the house. One night, I decided to bless the bathrooms and the den so I'd have more safe places to go. I spent many nights in the den because I was too scared to run upstairs to my room. Eventually, I had the entire house blessed, and a medium told me that there wasn't just one demon. There were many. They were everywhere. I only saw one because it was the only one strong enough to manifest. Now that it's over, I know one thing for sure: ghosts are real. And whenever I watch shows or movies with paranormal themes, I get chills because I know these things exist. It's not just a story, it's personal. About a year and a half ago, my father invited me to West Covina, California to visit my grandfather. I wasn't particularly thrilled. My grandfather can be a bit of a chauvinist, but I knew the trip would allow me to visit my grandmother's grave, something I hadn't done since her funeral 4 years prior. I missed her deeply. She was a classy, graceful woman who endured my grandfather's harshness with poise, always rising above. So I agreed, feeling that the chance to visit her gravesite would make the trip worthwhile. On the second day, my dad took me to Forest Lawn Memorial in Covina, a cemetery more beautiful and vast than any I'd ever seen. My grandmother's grave sat atop a small hill, overlooking Covina Hills, a room with a view, as we joked since her passing. We brought a bouquet of purple roses, her favorite, and sat by her grave, sharing memories. After a while, my dad got up to find a friend's grave nearby, leaving me to tidy up around my grandmother's plot. I pulled weeds and rearranged the flowers, taking my time, when suddenly, a man appeared next to me, holding a bouquet of white roses, her favorite. I hadn't noticed him approach, and he seemed to know exactly where he was going, heading straight to her grave without looking around, as if he'd been there countless times before. He looked strikingly out of place, yet somehow timeless. He was dressed in perfectly pressed tan trousers, a cream-collared shirt, a light yellow and blue plaid tie, and a tan Eisenhower jacket. His shoes, dark brown quarter brogues, looked polished and pristine, and his hair was neatly parted and slicked back. He had an aura of kindness, his face peaceful and warm, and when he greeted me, I felt instantly at ease. "Hello there," he said, smiling. "Hey, are you here to visit my grandmother?" I asked, thinking maybe he was a friend of hers I hadn't met. He nodded, still smiling. "Yes, I am. I don't think we've met before. I'm her granddaughter." "Bree?" he interrupted with a knowing chuckle. I was taken aback. "Yeah, I take it you've heard of me?" "Oh yes, good things, of course. I'm David. It's nice to meet you, Bree," he said, placing the white roses in the vase on her grave. "It's nice to meet you too, David. How did you know my grandmother?" "Oh, I knew her a long time ago," he replied, his smile never fading. "My dad's here," I said. "Have you met him?" David shook his head but said he'd heard a lot about him. I offered to call my dad over, sure he'd want to meet a friend of Grandma's. David gave me a slight nod, so I stood up, calling to my dad down the hill. "Dad! Hey, Dad!" "What?" he called back. "There's a guy up here I want you to meet. He's one of Grandma's friends." I turned back to David, ready to introduce him, only he was gone. The white roses he'd left were gone, too. I scanned the area around her grave, but it was just open grass and flat plaques marking other graves. There were no headstones, no trees, no place where he could have disappeared. When my dad joined me, he looked confused. "You said there was a guy?" "Yeah, he said his name was David and that he knew Grandma," I said. His eyes widened. "Brianna, your grandmother didn't know anyone named David. Do you understand me? We're leaving. Now." I didn't argue. His reaction unsettled me more than the encounter itself, and we left quickly. A few days later, my grandfather asked if I'd like to help him create a scrapbook of my grandmother's life. I eagerly agreed, excited to sort through her old photographs. As I sifted through the black and white snapshots, I came across a box of photos with a man who wasn't my grandfather. In one of the clearer photos, I recognized him instantly. It was David, the man from the cemetery. Only these photos were from the 1940s. I took the picture to my grandfather, who explained that the man was my grandmother's first husband, David. My grandfather told me they'd been happily married until David had died in a tragic accident. One day, David was out in their barn, and as he reached for something, he accidentally knocked over a shotgun. The blast killed him instantly. Hearing this filled in the gaps of my experience, but it also left me with a comforting thought. Even after all these years, even in death, David's love for my grandmother had endured. He had come to visit, just as I had, to bring her roses one last time. It was a beautiful reminder that love transcends everything, even death. It's a memory I'll carry with me forever. This happened on January 11th, 2010. The night before, my aunt called to ask if I could spend the night at my great-grandmother's house. She was starting a new medication, and my aunt wanted someone there just in case. I agreed easily, not thinking much of it and certainly not expecting anything unusual. Here's how the night unfolded between 10:30 p.m. and 4 a.m. The shower. The first thing I did when I arrived was take a shower in the bathroom my grandfather had built. He was meticulous about it, always insisting that everyone dry the shower after using it. That night, I forgot. About 5 minutes later, as I went back in to get my clothes, I was hit with an intense wave of nausea. I glanced at the shower, remembering his rule. Feeling a strange urgency, I grabbed a towel and dried the shower thoroughly. The nausea disappeared immediately. An after-dinner visitor. After dealing with the bathroom, I decided to eat some leftovers my grandmother had made. I took my plate to the living room and sat on the couch beside my grandfather's old recliner. It was the spot closest to my grandmother's bedroom, so I figured if she needed anything, I'd hear her right away. I ate, watched some TV, and eventually drifted off. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up, realizing I'd left the TV on, so I switched it off and tried to go back to sleep. I was lying on the couch facing the cushions when suddenly, an overwhelming feeling came over me, like someone was approaching. Every hair on my arms stood up, and I turned around, thinking my grandmother was there. But there was nothing, only darkness. I pulled the covers over my head and tried to ignore it, eventually falling back asleep. 3:30 a.m. The lights. Not long after, I jolted awake, feeling uncomfortably hot. I sat up, trying to cool off and calm down, listening to the faint sounds of traffic outside. But then, that same feeling crept over me, like someone was watching me or moving toward me, closer and closer. The sensation was so strong I panicked, instinctively swinging my arms to push whatever it was away. The feeling vanished for a moment, and I scanned the room, my eyes wide and heart pounding. Then, out of the pitch blackness, I saw tiny, brilliant blue and yellow lights floating about 4 inches from my face. They hovered for a few seconds, flickering gently before fading away into the darkness. I lay there, frozen, wondering if I'd just seen a ghost or some kind of spiritual energy. Too shaken to move, I hid under the covers, counting the hours until morning. When my grandmother woke up around 7 a.m., I told her everything. She and my aunt both said that it was likely my great-grandfather checking in on me. My grandmother said he visited her almost every night. It's a night I'll never forget. I'd never experienced anything paranormal before, and it left me feeling both unsettled and oddly comforted. The encounter felt non-threatening but deeply eerie. Those blue and yellow lights are permanently burned into my memory, and I've never seen anything like them since. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to spend the night alone there again. I came across this site a few days ago, and it seemed like the perfect place to share a story that stayed with me since it happened 2 years ago. It was shortly after I moved from the Philippines to the US. In those early months, I kept mostly to myself, chatting with friends back home. Occasionally, I'd go out with my stepsister who lived nearby. Her husband was deployed in the Middle East with the US Marine Corps, but he came home for Christmas, bringing along his fellow Marine friend, Anthony. On my 20th birthday, in the heart of winter, we decided to go out for a movie with another friend and his girlfriend. Anthony drove a 2-seater convertible, and since everyone was teasing us about being together, I ended up riding with him. After the movie and a late dinner, we dropped off our friend's girlfriend near the edge of Lake Tahoe. Her father offered directions to take a quicker route back, but my brother-in-law, wary of the freeway after a few drinks, opted for the scenic route instead. Anthony and I followed close behind. The drive was smooth until we reached a dense patch of fog, with nothing but open cornfields on either side of the road. Suddenly, my brother-in-law pulled over, and Anthony followed suit, parking beside him. I saw my brother-in-law crouching by the side of his car, and Anthony and I laughed, assuming he was sick from all the drinks. But then we heard them arguing, their voices tense and panicked. We got out and asked what was going on. My brother-in-law, visibly shaken, said they might have hit a woman wearing a long black dress. Anthony and I exchanged looks of disbelief. There were no other cars on that dark, chilly road in the middle of the night, and certainly no signs of anyone crossing. After several minutes of urging him to leave, even bringing up the consequences he could face, my brother-in-law reluctantly got back into the car, and we continued down the road. The light-hearted teasing between Anthony and me faded, and a strange, uneasy silence settled over us. What happened next is something I'll never forget. As we drove, I felt an unsettling presence behind us. Glancing into the rearview mirror, I caught sight of a figure, a woman with jet-black hair, wearing a long black dress. She wasn't walking but seemed to be floating just behind the trunk, her form outlined in the faint glow of Anthony's taillights. A chill washed over me as I noticed she had no face, just an empty void, like a shadow. She looked exactly like a figure I'd seen once in the Philippines when I was in 4th grade. The figure disappeared suddenly as we rounded a sharp right curve that led to a busy street, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I didn't tell Anthony what I'd seen, fearing he'd think I was crazy. But I noticed he was gripping the wheel, sweat beading on his forehead despite the freezing temperature. The next morning, I found Anthony washing his car in the front yard. Frost had collected on the car from the cold winter night. He looked up, a small smile on his face, and said, "Thanks for staying calm last night." Puzzled, I asked what he meant, and he led me to the back of his car. Running water over the trunk, faint handprints appeared, their ghostly shapes visible as the frost melted away. Anthony admitted he'd seen the woman too. He'd known I saw her as well since I kept glancing at the mirrors. We agreed not to tell anyone. My parents would have been furious that my brother-in-law had driven after drinking. But later, as things grew serious between us, Anthony confessed something else. He could see ghosts. Oh. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. As children, my older sister, Julia, and I lived in a house in San Jose, California, a home our parents moved into years before we were born. The previous owner, an elderly man, had passed away in his sleep there. When we were little, our parents told us stories about an imaginary friend we played with, whom we called Captain. They thought nothing of it until we described Captain to them. He was an old man, around 75, with wire-like white hair, plenty of missing teeth, and a crooked spine. Curious, our parents brought us a photo of an old man the next day. It was Captain. At 5 years old, I didn't understand the significance of recognizing him, but looking back, I realized it was a picture of Hidalgo Jimenez, the man who'd lived in the house before us. As I got older, I learned that he'd passed away in our very room. When I was 10, I fully understood who he was and how eerie it was that Julia and I had seen him. Strangely, once we understood, both my sister and I stopped seeing Captain. But for me, that wasn't the end of it. Even after Captain disappeared, I continued seeing others, people whom no one else could see. In school, I would tell stories to teachers and classmates about these people. One day, I even described the principal's late father in exact detail without ever having seen a photo. He had passed away 23 years before. I was only 13 then, and I didn't fully grasp how unique this was until I turned 15. That's when I stopped sharing my experiences with just anyone and kept it between my family and me. These figures always appeared surrounded by a dark gray haze, as if they were caught between worlds. I could even tell when a woman had lost a pregnancy, either through miscarriage or abortion, her lower stomach would be covered in the same gray haze. The world was full of spirits, each with their own shadowed mist that told of their past. But there was another type of figure I'd occasionally see, shrouded not in gray, but in a dense red haze. I soon realized that these weren't human at all. They were demons. Whenever a demon sensed that I could see them, they would try to violently harass me, attempting to force their way into my body. I've been possessed a few times, but I've usually fought them off quickly. One time, however, a demon took hold of me in a way that I couldn't shake off. It filled me with so much anger that I lashed out at my sister. I didn't harm her, but my parents, alarmed by my behavior, decided to call the police. After the fight, I retreated to my room, where I eventually fell asleep. About 20 minutes later, my parents came to check on me. They found me asleep, but the walls and ceiling were covered in the word, "kill," written 8 times in what looked like blood. The lowest writing was 8 feet off the ground, and my bedroom ceiling stands at 10 feet. I'm only 5 feet 3 inches and had no chairs or ladders in the room. My parents couldn't explain how it had been done. Terrified, they called the police and I was sent to a psychiatric hospital. I stayed in the hospital for a week. Doctors and staff questioned me, trying to find any rational explanation, but there was none. It was physically impossible for me to have written on those walls. With nothing medically wrong, they sent me home. I fought off that demon the way I always do, by forcing myself to fall asleep. When I wake up, I've usually gained enough strength to shake them off, but it's never easy. These demons attempt to take control of my body, hoping to experience the physical world, and they torment my family in the process. My parents and I believe that my connection to the spirit world stems from a near-death experience at birth. The umbilical cord wrapped around my neck, and I was delivered 2 months early in an emergency surgery that barely saved me.